All right, members, we'll call this meeting of Management Audit Committee on the September, June 14th, 2021. Appreciate all of you attending. I think let's go ahead and call the roll, please.
Mr. Chairman, for calling roll, Senator Bouchard.
Here.
Senator Guru.
Here.
Senator James.
Here.
Senator Perkins.
Excused.
Representative Brown.
Here.
Representative Gray.
Here.
Representative Sherwood. Here. Representative Stivar.
Present.
Vice Chairman Boner.
Here.
And Chairman Barlow.
Here. All right, thank you very much. Thank you for our staff for having it all set up today and ready to go. As members, you'll note we have a lot of materials in your packet, but hopefully you've had an opportunity to review them and we can go through them fairly timely manner. Just have a highlight overview from our staff or the presenters if necessary and get to the meat of any issues that we want to tackle. A couple of things about the committee, Management Audit Committee, as some of you have served on this before. It's a statutory committee. Historic practices, it runs the opposite of Management Council. So if the president is the chairman of Management Council, then a House member is the chairman of Management Audit. That's just historic practice. In the 2 terms, I guess I've been on it, or the 2 years I've been on it, that's the way it's been. So President Perkins was the chairman last year. And because now he was chairman and president at the same time, but now that President Dockstader appointed Senator Boner as the lead for the Senate, and I'll be the lead for the House. As you also know, in statute, there's the opportunity to appoint an 11th member. This committee is a 5 and 5 membership, so it's unlike the standing committees, which are 9 and 5. This has a opportunity for an 11th member. We don't have to take that up now unless somebody wants to, but certainly in this meeting or a subsequent meeting, if somebody's interested, we can nominate another member to be a part of it. In tradition, also historic practices, it would be the opposite chamber of the chairman. So it would be a senator for this legislature. The final thing I would say is the management audit generally rotates back and forth opposite of management council. And as you know, we changed management council that takes effect this coming February. And so we'll have to make a decision or change statute to decide if we want to flop back and forth every year instead of every other year, which management council is now going to flop. Good morning, Senator Perkins. So good to see you. We got a front row seat for you right up here. So anyway. That's right. All right. Any questions from the committee before we take off? We'll go right into our agenda. With a overview from Ms. Bodewins, Ms. Fround, which I'm not going to get it right. I never do, and I apologize, and Ms. Smith. And then any public comment. So any questions from the members? Any questions? Representative Gray, is the audio good for you?
Yeah, thank you.
All right. All right. So Ms. Bodewins, thank you very much. Ms. Bodewins, of course, is administrator of our Research and Evaluation Division and our Legislative Service Office, and give an overview. And like I said, most of the materials have been provided to you. So maybe the highlights and then anything else you want to add, Ms. Bodewins, and then we'll take any questions. Please proceed, or Ms. Smith. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We did put together a PowerPoint that kind of briefly outlines what this committee's role is, kind of what is an evaluation or audits that we perform. In terms of staff for this committee, we have Amanda Freund and Carla Smith. Also, other research analysts, they do work for this committee. We're kind of doing a field approach, so you might see other people appearing before this committee as workloads dictate, but the primary staffers are the 2 here today. And they might be doing work products. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started with it. It's only 20 slides, so
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Carla Smith, and we're going to give you just a real brief history of the committee and its purpose and how we do program evaluations and what products we provide. So this will pertain to the first section of documents that you have in your notebook that have the history of program eval. It has the statutes. It has past reports, a list of the past reports going back, I think, to 2015. And then it has an impacts and outcome report as well to show what kind of legislative impacts the committee reports have had, and also what it has done as far as enhancing performance in the agencies and the programs that we've evaluated. Because our reports go, basically, they make recommendations both to the committee, giving policy options, and they also address the agency to make their changes so that they are more efficient and compliant. So with the first slide, thank you, Amanda. Management Audit Committee was created in 1984 to oversee sunset programs. And this was after it had initially been a financial function. And then in 1988, the legislature repealed the requirement for sunset reviews. Those, I think everybody knows what sunsets are. Okay. I know we have some new members. Okay. And they kept the Management Audit Committee and they directed it to become more of an agency program evaluation or audit function. And this was becoming popular around the states as they saw that there was a need to go into the agencies and actually ferret out what is actually happening. So the next slide is the committee purpose. And you are basically the governmental oversight. So kind of like the watchdog of the legislature. So that is your primary function as management audit. And so you have several options that you can use, and we'll talk about those tools in a little bit. But also more recently, we've become the home committee to a few agencies. And this started when A&I asked if they could be appointed to a home committee, and because they were just basically reporting to JAC, and they felt that they had other issues and needs that might be better addressed during a committee that could work through those things. So we took on A&I, ETS, and just recently the Public Funds Division of Department of Audit. Next slide, please. So with the oversight and accountability, according to statute, we're authorized to conduct, you authorize us or direct us to conduct audits of agencies. And the term agency is really broadly defined. And so that is any state agency, division, department of any state agency, institution, council, board, commission, or any other unit, subunit, or program of the state government. So you have pretty broad reaching as long as they use any funds, general funds, or public monies that go through the government, you have authority. When the function was originally created, LSO conducted financial audits, as I mentioned, and after the reorganization in '78, the audit division took on many of the financial aspects and responsibilities, was now turned over to the budget and fiscal division, such as they used to do fiscal notes in management audit. And we became more programmatic. So then next slide, thank you. As you can see in auditing, there are financial audits, which are very much dictated by the standards for CPAs and financial audits. And then there are legislative audits, and our shop is on the legislative audit. So that's why we evaluate agencies' performance and compliance with statute. And we compare what is happening with them to what it should be and what it could be optimized. And we're always looking to make it better. Okay. Abby, did you want to say anything about financial audits?
Unless the committee has questions.
Okay.
Please, Senator. Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just curious on why in 1990, you guys didn't mention that day when the state examiner position was eliminated out of the Constitution, at which point there was no more audits done of the government. So that's basically what you're describing, the Management Audit Committee. That's what we're supposed to be doing. If I'm understanding it correctly.
Mr. Chairman, the
Please proceed.
state examiner actually existed with the legislative audit division. And up until 78, the legislative audit division had a CPA at its head. In 78, they started to move away from financial audits in the legislature, and a director, I think it was a division head at this point, it was no longer on par with the legislative service office director. The division head was not a CPA, and it hasn't been since that date. The state examiner still existed until the recommendation in the 90s after the Ferrari reports, the consultant reports came in and got rid of the state examiner, and kind of, I believe that's when the Department of Audit was then created, and they moved the auditing functions around. But LSO has not been doing financial audits to the full extent since at least 78.
Follow up, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So our government hasn't had a financial audit by the legislature as constitutionally required since 78.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Bowden, Ms. Bodewins.
The Constitution says the legislature shall direct audits prescribed by law. And so by law, the legislature has enacted provisions to have the Department of Audit conduct audits, to have the state examiner, to no longer have the state examiner. The legislature has done all of that. So while the legislature may not be contracting for actually directing the audits itself, they are by law telling other agencies and telling who to audit what.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman.
Chairman, Senator,
Thank you.
President Perkins.
Whatever I am. I'm a has-been. The so as we talk about that, I mean, there are significant financial audits that are conducted by the state. Is that correct?
Ms. Bodewins.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Perkins, the state auditor contracts out to have statewide financial audits done.
Correct. And in large part, that's what the CAFR is. Isn't that correct? Is a statewide audited by a CPA firm, an independent audit that goes out and looks at the financial controls, the internal controls. It looks at the expenditures to some degree, but does audit the all of state government essentially, doesn't it?
Thank you,
Mr.
Ms. Bodewins.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Perkins, that's correct. They're looking at all the financials for the state.
And then thank you, Mr. Chairman. And then the last question is, and ultimately that report comes to the legislature, including this committee, and it's our responsibility to review that audit and also look at findings and do other things in order that are to correct those. Is that also correct?
Ms. Bodewins.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Perkins, that's correct. It does come to this committee. I believe the committee had the state auditor present at it last year. Before that, I can't tell you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion, and we'll get into some of the other political subdivisions which are audited through the department because they'll be here in a little bit. Public Funds Division. Senator, please. Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I understand that it's done through the CAFR and all that, through the executive branch, the auditor, but our Constitution says that the legislature shall provide by law. And right now we receive the reports, but we're not doing the examinations, which this committee should be doing. If I'm understanding correctly, we should be doing the financial audits and doing all that, if I'm understanding the Constitution correctly.
Ms. Bodewins, if you want to respond, otherwise we can get a background paper and have a different conversation offline. Go ahead with the senator.
Mr. Chairman, Senator James, I would prefer if we're doing constitutional analysis, get that reviewed by someone. The Constitution says prescribed by law, and the legislature's enacted laws to audit state government. The enacting the laws is how you're satisfying.
Thank you. Further, Senator Boner.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, it's great to be on this committee, and I have to admit, I've got a lot to learn. So I'm just curious, maybe this is a question for staff, maybe it's for Senator Perkins, the accountant and the chair of the Appropriations Committee. But what's the difference between an audit as described, that we've been talking about, say, our budget process? I hear stories about JAC asking about how many copiers an agency has, and I'm just wondering what the difference is in terms of levels of detail, and any background information would be helpful, I think, to establish all the things that we do as a legislative branch to make sure that our finances are under control. Is a difference between appropriating money and then verifying it, or is there more to it than that?
And if it's going to be Ms. Bodwin or Ms. Smith, if it's going to be covered later in the discussion, you're welcome to punt that a little bit if you'd like to address it now, or you'd like to wait. That'd be your prerogative. Please.
Mr. Chairman, I think it segues pretty well into what we're talking about right now. The program evaluation staff, they do about 4 different types. There's 4 different tools you can use in terms of doing a legislative audit, and those are outlined in statute. There's program evaluations, which Carla will go into much more in depth about what those are. There's performance audits. You're going to be kind of looking at, are their processes good? Are their internal controls good? Are they meeting their goals? Can also look at policy alternatives. Let's say that perhaps the legislature or this committee's identified a problem already and they want an analysis of specific policy options, or they would like an analysis of what are some potential policy options that this committee could look at to address a problem. This would be kind of similar to what we've been doing with the Department of Audit Special District. It was not done through an evaluation, but you could do something like that where you look specifically in depth at policy options. And then there's also, we can look at accounts and operations. This would be looking at budgets. This would be looking at processes for expending funds. Also looking at, what does the CAFR say? As part of an legislative audit, we could look at the CAFR for 5 years. Have they had reoccurring problems? Is there something in the agency that this committee could identify that perhaps needs to be addressed? In terms of copiers or those efficiencies, I'll get to that a little later in terms of what statutorily we're supposed to consider as part of an evaluation, if that works, Mr. Chairman.
Please proceed.
So as part of these legislative audits, statutorily, they're required to consider kind of 3 main areas. I clustered these to make it. So the first would be legislative intent. The second is kind of a transparency aspect. And then there's 3 is programmatic improvements. And I think that's where you would be looking for efficiencies, Senator Boner. So under legislative intent, this is going to be your 28.8.107E little I through III. And if you want to look at the statutes there. So the 3 main branches of this legislative intent aspects are the funds expended in accordance with legislative intent? Are the programs conducted in accordance with legislative intent? And have the funds and properties been properly administered? And that's in accordance with the law. So one caveat in terms of legislative intent is often legislators, they have an idea of why something was enacted, but LSO is, we look at the language of the law. We look at what's actually been enacted on the paper, do an legal analysis if necessary to what was the legislative intent. And we can also go pull additional resources from the committee as to what was documented for legislative intent. And perhaps there's something that comes up that might not be in this committee's mind what the actual legislative intent was. And perhaps that's an area that then needs to be addressed or fixed. It's this kind of opportunity to go in and review how the statutes are being interpreted by agencies, what's written, and perhaps if problems have developed since those statutes have been enacted. In terms of transparency, we're looking at, does an agency's reports and financial statements accurately and fully disclose its operations and provide a basis for evaluating the agency's operations? When I read this, I think of the strategic plans that every agency is required to look at. Is their strategic plan, are their goals focused on something that the legislature thinks should be a goal? Are they actually, their reports to the public, to the committees, are they actually disclosing what it is they're doing? Are they reporting what they say they should be doing or what the legislature said they should be doing? That communication in terms of here's how the agency is operating. Programmatic improvements, I would say.
Ms. Goodwin, I have a question on that. Yep, Representative Brown?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Bedouins, just a quick question on that. At what point do we stop looking at what's the delineation point of who do we look at? So I know we're looking at the executive branch here within state government, and I know we have started delving into the area of county and local governments. At what point do we stop that transition of the transparency line, and where does that become a non-management audit issue?
Ms. Bodewins?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, I think you know how I talked about how we have different tools? If we're talking purely audit, it needs to be something within the legislature's control. And I think the definition of agency is in statute for an audit. And I don't think we could go audit a special district in terms of a legislative audit. Now, what we've been doing with special districts in the past year or two, it has not been under this 28.8.107 statute. It's been more of an interim study, looking at what's going on in these districts, the dollars coming out, are there areas perhaps that need to be addressed? And that's been more as just part of the committee's studying of audits in general throughout the state and the reporting requirements for special districts.
Senator Boner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Follow up, does that include school districts? Or could it?
Ms. Bodewins?
Chairman Barlow, Vice Chairman Boner, I would have to go back and double check that. I've never looked. I don't believe an individual school district would fall under the Department of Audit's program evaluation agency definition, but the Department of Ed might. The larger picture items, you could look at statewide implications. I don't think you have the authority to go evaluate how a specific school district is operating, but you could look at a large.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Perkins?
Thank you. And a year ago, we didn't evaluate the programs that each district are doing, but a year ago, we did take a look at the number of financial audits of the larger school districts and looked at their internal report, the auditor's letter that comes back that identifies deficiencies in accounting, identifies deficiencies in internal control and otherwise. And we actually sent out, there were some that hadn't responded to those letters, and there were some that we actually sent out letters to some of them inquiring about those very issues and did get responses, if I remember right. Is that correct?
Ms. Bodewins?
Chairman Barlow, Senator Perkins, we did send letters and they were predominantly special districts and a couple municipalities, but we sent them letters just as a follow-up. It wasn't a specific audit though.
No, but we also did school districts too. We did some school districts too,
Chairman
because
Barlow,
they do receive general fund monies.
Please proceed.
that was before my time. Carla will know about this.
So so one of the reasons that the Public Funds Division under the chairmanship of Senator Perkins was kind of brought in as the home committee, and that request was made of Management Council, was because of this very issue. It was both school districts, special districts, municipalities, et cetera. It was to give us a better view of what and have interaction with the Department of Audit on those particular things. So there may be interest in continuing that better understanding of as we get through what we did last year, maybe have a focus on some of those other type districts, including school districts, which the Department of Audit Public Funds Division does have interaction with, and they can overview some of that here in a bit. So thank you for that, Chairman Perkins. Please proceed. Mrs. Smith.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Bonner, Senator Perkins, just to add to that, yes, we did look at, we reviewed the audits of, I believe, 5 school districts with the Department of Audit Public Funds, and we reviewed them for their practices, and that was looking at those trends for issues and found some trends that were disturbing. But we also have looked at the statewide education department. We've done a couple of evaluations. One was on the PAWS assessment tool, and another one was on state level governance, which was the relationship between the superintendent of school and the Board of Education. So we have delved into that realm. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep, thank you very much. Please proceed. I think we're at programmatic improvements. Please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, so for the last three.
Just a moment. Sorry, Senator Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking at 28.8.107 and on section D, it says audits and accounts and operations of any agency or of any entity directly or indirectly receiving state funds. That's pretty wide view there. I also would like to, we have new members of the committee, and look, I'm pleased that we've got a lot of this in front of us because it's kind of how I got on this committee. I brought a bill back in 2019 called legislative audits. And I modeled the bill around what had happened in other states. We're one of 3 states that do not do direct legislative audits. And a lot of what came out on this bill is that they said it was unconstitutional because we couldn't audit the executive branch. And I pulled out the pesky Constitution and found that we actually have a provision in the Constitution. And then as I looked at it, how it got there, it became ratified by the people in 1990. It was right after 89 when we took, the legislature took the examiner out of the picture. So I think we just heard, and that's the most I've heard about the examiner being part of the legislative audit process. So it looks like somewhere where there's still a disconnect here because it says in statute that we have wide view. We can look at any entity. So I got on this committee, and I think it was I want to say Senator Perkins was the chairman at the time, and he said there was a lot of good things in my bill. And I had just kind of made it a point that we have to get back to this point to where we have to be able to audit directly. And here we are today still talking about these same things. However, it looks like we're starting to see a wider view in some of this that's in front of us. But anyway, I would suggest people go look at Senate File 158 in 2019 and look at some of those directives, how maybe we should be putting them into statute and just get past all this, start looking at some things that need to be looked at critically. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Please proceed with your presentation.
Mr. Chairman, so the programmatic improvements, these are final 3 considerations that every audit shall consider to some extent. First would be, is there a duplication of services within the agency or between agencies and programs? Is there an alternative means of achieving the same results? And then is there a way to improve agency efficiency, economy, and effectiveness? I go back now to Senator Gomer's question regarding who's looking at the number of copiers or that sort of level of detail. I'm not sure a program evaluation legislative audit would get to that level of detail unless we flag it as an issue and a big issue. When we go into these studies, we look at the agency, we start looking at their operations, and we pick objectives, but to go on a micro detail down to copiers and how many people are using a copier, whether there could be less, that's, there's a balance of time and resources in terms of the outcome. And so that's what we try to do now. If the committee wanted us to look at that, absolutely. So that would be something that we work on objectives and stuff based on what the committee is looking for. If there's an issue, if there's a known issue that maybe there are too many copiers in this data, I use this as an example. I know it's just full randomly, but we could look at that. But typically, we would not go to that level of detail if we're told to just go audit a specific program. So finally, again, we kind of get to how do we start on this selection?
Ms. Bodwin's, either pull your mic closer to you or speak up like you have a 5-year-old, not a talk.
Mr. Chairman, I'm used to a Zoom hitting unmute. I'm not used to a button.
Please
I
proceed.
apologize. If everyone is good with what I just said softly, I'll move on.
Yeah, just keep going.
So now we're going to get to topic selection of how does this committee pick a topic? How do you pick a good topic that's worthy of the resources that would go into it? Typically, topics come through other committees, their chairman, individual legislators, interim topic studies. We did a kind of a 2-year plan last year where staff would go in and look at interim topics that other agencies or other committees are studying and flag those. And we're going to track those just to see and follow up at the end of this interim. Are there topics that perhaps the committees have been studying at a broad level that would require the amount of depth and in-depth the micro detailing that could come out of this committee. So we are going to keep tracking those. And then also committee members bring topics. We do not take topics from the public. If we get a call about that, we actually refer them to a committee member, and then the committee member would need to bring it forward. So once we get a kind of
Just a moment, Ms. Bodwin, Representative Gray, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Speaker Barlow. Appreciate it. So I got a couple of questions. One is on the federal funds issue. I mean, we've had so many of these COVID funds flowing through state government, and I think that would be a real topic for management audit. And the statute is pretty clear that we can audit that. So I guess one question I would have, and I know we talked a little bit about this at the end of the day, have you thought about how that would look? And two, have you thought about how we get moving again and doing these performance audits? Because one of the things we haven't talked about in this presentation is the fact that there hasn't been one in 2 years, and we authorized one. It didn't happen because of some data issues. And so I think it's very important that this iteration of the committee gets this moving in addition to the fact that I do support the financial audit concept as well. But I do think we need to get back to doing performance audits as well. Thank you.
That was more of a statement. So if you'd like to proceed with your presentation, I think we'll get to some of those things. And we'll have some decision points during the day and at the end of the day about what we do want to proceed with as a audit or et cetera. So please proceed, Ms. Bodwin.
Mr. Chairman, we'll go to the next slide then. So as ideas come in, staff review them for feasibility and appropriate, are we the appropriate body to be doing it? But we also start doing research papers or scoping papers to start getting the ideas and the background before the committee. Sometimes you might have a question and a research paper will answer that question. You don't need to put the resources into an evaluation. Other times you might be interested in a topic and we do a scoping paper or research paper and you'll see, okay, here are some issues we've identified, and that might also help kind of narrow the field of what the committee is interested in. Ideal topics are those that committee members identify as having sort of a discrete problem or concern regarding operations versus let's go see what we might find. Those take a long time. You might not find anything. And I think the goal is to get studies going, to get issues before the committee that the committee can decide if it's something that needs to be fixed legislatively or even programmatically through the agency. Evaluations take time and a dedication of staff resources. And so they need to be carefully scoped in order to make sure those resources are being used appropriately and wisely. We have interim studies in other committees, and those are often very broad. And this is the complete opposite. We're looking at like discrete topics that we can dive in and do the really deep dive and look at a specific issue. So I pulled this from Idaho because I thought it was great in terms of kind of the questions to ask yourself as you're looking at an evaluation topic. The first one, is it applicable and of interest? And this is statewide applicability. And is it of broad interest to legislators? Because whatever comes out of this committee, if you put the time and resources into studying something, it has to be something of interest to the wider body. Timely, is now the right time to study this issue? Oftentimes, if programs are changing or have recently changed, you can't go in and have that long-term data to look at, or they're in the middle of trying to improve themselves. And so if we were to come in, it might not be timely in terms of let's wait a couple years and then we'll go look at and see what they did today, whether it's working. Impact, will there be an impact on the program, the public, other organizations? We're looking at that. Cost savings, a potential for cost savings, increased productivity, elimination or duplication. However, I will say cost savings is not the only, sometimes an evaluation might lead to increased cost. That's cost saving is not always what you're looking for in an evaluation, but it can be a factor. Feasible, is there adequate data? Do we have access to that data? I know Representative Gray mentioned the Chen's evaluation. There was data, but to get that data to talk to each other was the issue, which we didn't complete the evaluation, but we did come out with papers regarding the juvenile justice system and their issues with their data systems. Control, this kind of comes back to that original question of, does the state have control over this entity? Does the legislature, can they be able to address problems found legislatively? And then touching back on, is there a problem, a concern, or a deficiency noted? Is there evidence to suggest that a program is in need of improvement? And finally, suitability. Is LSO Research and Evaluation Division the most appropriate person to conduct this study? Some studies we do not have the expertise to look at. And so you might, perhaps hiring an external consultant, like the IT study that was just completed. My shop could not do that. So you might, some areas we wouldn't be the person, but you could contract out for an appropriate consultant to complete that work. So I think Carla now is going to get into kind of what is an evaluation process, high fly, in terms of what does it look like? What do we do when we get assigned a topic?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. We're talking about evaluations for the most part, because over the last 35 years, that's primarily what the committee has requested from staff. And that's so much different than an interim committee topic, which is directed to the agency and they provide most of the information. You're in a unique position because you direct us as your staff to do this certain work. And so we take on these really in-depth, independent examination and assessments of specific state programs or functions to ensure that they're in compliance with legislative intent, that they improve their services to constituents and to strengthen your legislative oversight. So we'll make sure that, one, the statutes are working both directions, that they're following statutes and the statutes are still applicable, that they're meeting the population that they're intended to serve, and that they're doing that efficiently and using state resources appropriately. And so that does take a lot of time. And because we follow certain standards and we are very credible and professional in what we do, we have to follow a certain set of processes. And so I'll just go over those just real briefly. And this is all behind the scenes, so you don't need to worry about this, just so you understand kind of what's going into it. As Abby mentioned, we do upfront research or scoping papers to kind of flush out the basics, to find out what's going on. Is there really an issue? And then we bring that to the committee after a topic has been selected to us, because it's very important that we have a very narrowly defined scope. You can't just say, go look at Department of Health. That would be a non-starter. But if you say, go look at one little discrete part of Department of Health, say how they're handling residential treatment facilities, that would be very discrete. And we can do that. That is part of what we do in the scoping phase, which gets the lay of the land and to know what we're working with. And then we have a planning. We do a lot of planning. All of LSO kind of makes fun of us because we're always in a team meeting and we're always working on planning. We can plan the fun out of everything. And so we develop a work plan. We develop how we're going to approach it to make sure that we're not going to miss anything. We hold ourselves to very high standards of evidence. And we then defined objectives, and an objective is, okay, we see an issue in this aspect. So what do we need to do to prove or disprove that there is that problem there? And we go forward and we do the interviews, we do surveys, we look at documents, we look at best practices, we look at a large array of products, and make sure that we're really getting down at the ground level of what the issue is. So that takes planning, and then we accomplish those investigative works during field work. And that frequently will involve us traveling around the state. I've been to the state pen, we've been to Riverton, to the fire training center. We've been to most of the foster care facilities and residential treatment places. We've been to Osage to talk to state board members of education. And we've been all over the state. So we cover a lot of ground, and that takes some time. And we go there and we hit and we talk to everybody that we need to at that one fell swoop, and do interviews and get documents. And we come back and then we do our analysis, and we do data analysis, and we do programmatic analysis and compare everything and write up all of our findings there. Then we start writing the report, and it goes through rigorous review before we even send it out to the rest of LSO for cold reads and for external review. As I mentioned before, next slide, please. What we do is very much evidence-based. We can't just take one person's word for it. You know, the director may say, oh yeah, everything's working fine, this is how it is. But then you go frequently and you talk to the line workers and they're like, no, it's not. And so you have to go through many processes to make sure that the evidence is there. And part of this process, if you turn to the next slide, is the elements of a finding. And as you'll see, if you've read our reports, that we do findings and then we do recommendations. So when we make a finding, it's based on these elements. And I know they're kind of hard to see here, but criteria is what is best practice, or what should it be? How is it intended by state government? And so we kind of hold that up as the paradigm. Then we look to see how things really are at the agency or the program. And then we look deeper to see, well, what is the cause of the condition that's causing an effect that is not optimal? So there's the cause that creates the effect based on the condition, and we want to get to the criteria. So that's when we make recommendations that will help bring it there. And some of those recommendations will definitely be to the agencies, as those of you that were here when we did the follow-up to A&I for state procurement and leasing. And then some of them are policy options that we give to you if you wish to make changes, to consider for changes. So then go ahead and change the slide, please. Next, we complete the report. And as you've noticed in statute, it says that we must give the agency 15 days to review the report before they make their written response to us, before it's due. So we'll give them a draft confidential copy of the report. They review it, they scour it, and then during that time, we'll sit down and meet with them and we'll go over it in case they have issues that they think of tone, or if they want to argue a fact with us. Then we go back, we make sure that we're accurate, and if we made any changes, we provide another draft copy for them. They respond to that in writing, and those responses are always attached to the evaluation report. Then what we do is at the meeting, when we're going to present this report to the committee, you'll have the report in advance of the meeting in the meeting materials. Then we meet in executive session because confidentiality is very critical for this committee. Our work product is confidential because if somebody wants to talk to us about what's going on in their agency, frequently they don't even want to have us go over to their agency to talk to them there. They want to come here where they're not going to be seen so they can talk freely. And that's what you want. You want the honest story of what's going on, and that we will verify it. And so we meet in executive committee and we give our presentation to you, and you can ask us questions. The committee loves to ask us questions because we bring up so many different things. And then when you're done answering questions, asking and answering, then we bring in the agency, and it's still executive committee, and they give their presentation and respond to all the recommendations and talk about why or what their feelings are on that. If they agree, disagree, partially disagree. And then you ask them the hard questions. And that's why that is an executive session. Then once we leave executive session later during the appropriate point of business, that's when you vote to release the report. Or if you are concerned that they haven't provided something or that we need to do a little more research, then we go and we perform that. You direct us to do that. But every single report, evaluation report that we've ever presented in management audit has been released to the public. And so that's later. Go ahead and change, Amanda. So that's when it's released to the public. It's put on our website. We send an executive summary to all members of the legislature so that they can see what we've done. And if they have an interest in obtaining that report, or maybe even having management audit committee staff come and talk to their committee, because we can send the report to them or provide a presentation to them, or we can do additional information. We usually have part of our process is to have the committee, the agency come back, approximately 2 years later, for what is deemed in the statute a post-audit, which is our follow-up process. Now, we've had certain entities that have been problematic, and the committee has asked them to come in every 6 months for 2 years, and then a follow-up after that as well, plus going to all of their commission meetings. So it depends upon how you take the information, and you really have a lot of leeway in that. And what goes into the evaluation, you know, we gave you a program evaluation and policy options and internal control, you know, the performance audit. We do combine a lot of that depending upon the need for it in one evaluation. So it's not just, you know, you're locked into this, it's pro forma. We will absolutely look at internal controls when we're doing a program evaluation, but a performance audit would be a shorter kind of evaluation compared to the full-blown program evaluation, because we look at so much. So that's kind of where we are with this. As we go to the additional actions, thank you. So I think I've already mentioned these. Refer matters to the relevant committee. You can request the follow-ups. And then you also have that time to consider legislative changes. Perhaps there's something that we proposed and you're like, well, but what if we did this? You know, it's your options. You can do what you want to do. If you want us to go and perform another aspect, kind of another phase, we can do that too. So that kind of gives you a little bit of the flavor of what we do behind the scenes that you don't really have to worry about. You just know we're there and we're performing this work. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. So any questions? Would you just give a summary, Ms. Bodewins, of what you have for staff right now? Because you just went through a lot of things that you do behind the scenes, but it's not the only thing that you and your staff are responsible for. I want the committee to be clear about that role. So would you go through what your current staffing is and what other responsibilities you're fulfilling within the Legislative Service Office right now, not just you individually, but your staff, please?
Mr. Chairman, so currently we have 6 staffers plus myself in the research and evaluation division. There were 2 sections previously and they were combined to try to have some increased efficiencies. So my staff, we have 2 program evaluators, Amanda and Carla, and they will predominantly work on the program evaluation once something is assigned. But we also have research analysts who, all of my staffers, including Amanda and Carla, staff interim committees. They provide research requests for interim committees. Often those can serve as scoping paper for this committee if it were to come here, that background, just general information. So that's how we're trying to achieve kind of those cross utilizations. Whoever's staffing judiciary, if the committee's interested in a judiciary topic, well, you're going to get Ms. Creech to work on your evaluation. So we don't have that steep learning curve every time we dive in. Additionally, I would say last year I jinxed myself when I said we're usually slow during session, because during research, you know, requests during session are down, but we ran Zoom for about 8 hours a day last year during session. So if that keeps up, you know, my staffers will keep probably staffing standing committees during session as well for the electronic component. So I would say, and you know, you asked about capacity and evaluation, depending on the size and the scope of it, at least 2 people plus myself, possibly a 3rd person out of my 6. So.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, Senator James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In our conversations, you had told me that we don't have the capabilities of doing like a financial or a forensic audit, even though we are able to do that. What would it take to be able to do that? Would we, what additional staff would we need? Or would it be more cost effective to go to a 3rd party, since we wouldn't be doing one all the time?
Ms. Bodewins, and I think you've actually done some work on this, or there's been some work done on this previously. So if you want to give a short answer and then maybe provide us some written stuff, that would be great.
Mr. Chairman, Senator James, we will have to pull whatever's been done recently. I haven't found it as of yet, but we would need CPAs to do the financial audit. My staff have master's degrees. They're very good at research writing and analytics, but they're not CPAs. So that would be the one hang up that we would need.
So one of the things that we did, I think it was under, at the time, Chairman Perkins, is you'd actually look at what some other states have been doing and what they do, and had some staffing and some other things. I think that's correct, Ms. Smith. So maybe just refresh those materials and just provide them to the committee so that the committee can see what other states do if they are engaged in a financial audit type process, and what the resources they deploy toward that are. So at least we have an understanding or a baseline. Senator Perkins, Chairman Perkins, did you have anything else you wanted to add? I know you were the chairman for the last 2 years and this issue has come up before. So anything you wanted to add?
No, one thing I would add, Mr. Chairman, thank you, is that as you move in this direction, it's something that's a little bit newer. I think that we ask, and Management Council requested the ability for the public audit function to now come into this committee. And so I think part of the outreach is if we can add some more legislative oversight, I think it also provides us the ability, particularly because we did verify that this committee has subpoena power. Not every committee does. And the subpoena power in this committee is exercised by the chairman and vice chairman. If they ultimately decide to subpoena records, they can. And so with that, I think that gives us an ability to back up and assist the public audit function in what they do. And that was the whole point of some of the exercise we did, is that we in some instances, we actually having special districts blow off, if you would, the audit functions and the requests that were made. And so I think that we brought some attention to that. My guess is that the fact that we stepped in and started to do that probably spread. And my guess is, I hope that the answer is that we'll find out here in a minute, but hopefully we're finding people being as responsive or more responsive than they were in the past. And that was the whole idea. But ultimately it's somebody needs to oversee and ensure that the public funds that are entrusted to agencies, including, and in some instances we have limited ability, but including public subdivisions and special districts, that's spent appropriately and safeguarded appropriately.
Thank you. We'll, of course, with the Public Funds Division is here, and they're going to kind of give us some background and maybe even some suggestions of some authorities they think would be helpful.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Senator Guru.
thank you. Just to make sure I have it straight, right now as it sits, as your staff level sits right now, there are 7 of you. There's a research department for the entire legislature, all committee functions, including this one. True?
Ms. Bodowitz.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Guru, we staff the more substantive committees. Budget fiscal has their, 7 or 8 committees they staff it. Yes, there are about 8 standing committees that we also staff with research, as well as this committee. Which, Mr. Chairman, if you're interested, we pulled research products for each committee for the last 2 years, and this committee was at 24 since 2019, with other committees being down. I believe Judiciary and Corporations also had quite a few, but most of the other committees around 2, or, then there's the 9, and then there's those in the upper teens and 20s.
Okay, thank you. Follow up, Senator Guru.
And that, in addition to that, you also do work that comes down from individual legislators as well.
Ms. Bodowitz.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Groot, that's correct. We do have a prioritization system. So any of you that have requested individual projects and you've waited a month, that's why all committee work is prioritized in order to meet the deadlines of the committee meetings and to serve, we try to serve the most number of legislators in one project as possible. So we can prioritize committee work and then we hit the individual legislative requests.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So one question, just surveying the room, Mr. Representative Gray. Okay. One question, do we have any post-audit, the 2-year post-audits that we are anticipating receiving in the next year, this interim, Ms. Bodowitz?
Mr. Chairman, we had the state procurement and leasing, which we started in November, and we still have some follow-up with that. There's also the early intervention education. A lot of E's and I's. We have that one, which is coming up for a follow-up as well. We reached out, following our planning meeting, we reached out to the chairman of education to see if they're interested in hearing that follow-up. We have not heard back yet.
Okay, so the procurement one is on today. this afternoon. We have
It's
a follow-up for
continued
that.
follow-up, correct, from
continued,
what we
okay.
started in,
In early education, you're visiting with the education committee to see where they want that. But
correct.
okay, perfect. And that is one of their interim topics. So it seems appropriate they would follow up on that. All right. Anything else? Anything else for the kind of an overview of the committee, staffing, or things you'd like to provide, Ms. Bodowitz?
Mr. Chairman, I'm good to move on. You are.
All right, so we'll continue on with our agenda in a timely manner. I guess so we have our Department of Audit folks, Public Funds Division. Great to have you here with us today. Just line up and fire away. Welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee. My name didn't make it onto the agenda, but I'm Fred Rife. I'm the interim director of the Department of Audit.
Would you spell your last name, please, Fred?
RIFE.
Rifa. Thank you.
Yes, sir. And with your permission, I thought it might be helpful to give a 5-minute overview of the department as a whole and kind of where we're at with that before I turn it over to Mr. Chavez and his expertise in the Public Funds Division.
Please, Mr. Rifa, how long have you been the interim director then?
I've been interim director since last July,
Okay, I was going to say,
and I'll touch on that.
interim is getting longer now.
It's a long
Okay.
intro.
All right, that's what I was thought. You've been here before. Please proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 14 of my 16 years with the Department of Audit was spent in the banking division, most recently as the Deputy Banking Commissioner. In 2019, I was promoted to the Department of Audit's Administration Division Administrator. That's a mouthful. Essentially, that role is the CFO role and overseeing HR and IT, so kind of a broad look at the department. Last July, the former director retired 2 years into his 6-year term. And so the governor appointed me as interim director to kind of get us to the next stage. That next stage obviously has had some time passed since then. So the Department of Audit was created, as I understand it, in 1989 with the Government Efficiency or the Government Reorganization Act. And essentially it pulled together the audit and examination functions from several areas, including the State Examiner's Office, the Department of Revenue, and the State Auditor's Office. And it created what's called the Department of Audit as it exists today. And so within the Department of Audit, we have 4 divisions. We have the Banking Division, we have the Public Funds Division, which you'll hear from today. We have the Mineral Audit Division, and we have the Excise Tax Division. So as I understand it from talking with people who preceded me and looking at the forming statute 9-2-2003, part of that purpose was to create some level of independence so that you could speak to things like the Yellow Book government auditing standards and that type of thing. And as part of that process, they also created the appointment of the director of the Department of Audit in a different format than what most agency directors, how they're appointed. That's typically appointed by the governor at the pleasure of the governor with consent of the Senate. But it's essentially an at-will position. The Department of Audit Director was created such that it takes 2 out of the 3 of the governor, the Secretary of State, and the state treasurer to recommend somebody be the director of the Department of Audit. Once those 2 out of 3 recommend that, it goes to the Senate for confirmation. It's also created as a 6-year term rather than the traditional 4-year terms of other agency director appointments. So that does, I think, a couple of things. It adds to the Yellow Book government auditing standards, which requires that the director have some level of independence from various areas. So with that said, it's my understanding that the governor's office is working with the Secretary of State and with the state treasurer's office to make that process continue forward with the idea that somebody will be presented and then offered for confirmation at the next session. So that's where I think we're at on the director position. Just a couple of maybe high-level ideas of what our other divisions do. The banking division is probably the one that's least like the others because it's a financial regulatory division. And so that division has evolved over time from chartering our state chartered banks to also chartering our new state trust or our new trust companies, state chartered trust companies. And now more recently, they also charter and supervise and regulate the new special purpose depository institutions that came out of the blockchain environment. That division also now has a pretty robust uniform consumer compliance unit. It has everything from Mortgage Practices Act, the Money Transmitters Act, those types of things. And then it also works with the State Banking Board. The State Banking Board is the approval authority for granting the charter to our state chartered institutions. I will say that the department director also serves as an ex officio voting member of the State Banking Board. So those two work together. The banking division is also the home for the administrative function for the collection agency board. And that's one I think you'll hear a little bit about this afternoon on the report on efficiencies for boards. We have two audit divisions that really are in the revenue realm. And that's our mineral audit division, looks at tax and royalty revenue for both state and federal. And then we also have our excise tax division, which looks at sales and use and tobacco, fuel, that type of thing. The banking division has its home in the legislature in front of the Minerals Committee. The two revenue divisions have their home in the legislature in front of the Revenue Committee. And of course, the Mineral Audit Division also does some work with the Minerals Committee, excuse me. So that's in essence how the department is created. That's how it's structured even today. And that's where we're at with the director position. So that brings us to the Public Funds Division. And many of the things you discussed today already have their home in this division. And obviously Justin is a CPA and a long-term employee, the administrator of that division, and Rich have a lot of experience in working in those areas. So just wanted to give a little kind of high-level idea of how the department looks. And then if it's okay with you, turn it over to Mr. Chavez to do his presentation.
Thank you very much. Any quick questions for the interim director, the long-serving interim director? All right, thank you. Please proceed.
All righty. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Justin Chavez, Public Funds Administrator. I have with me Rich Cummings. He's our state and local audit manager. If you have any questions about specific audits or specific processes for our state and local government function, he's here to answer those. Any specific questions about our school audit function? I previously served as the school finance audit manager for 7 years before my current position, so I can answer those. So as Fred mentioned, the Public Funds Division is one of 4 auditing divisions within the department. The other 3 audit private companies. We in the Public Funds Division audit government entities, and that can range from state agencies all the way down to political subdivisions, towns, special districts. Our division is organized into 2 sections. One of those sections is the school finance audit section that has 5 auditors and an audit manager. And the responsibility of that section is to audit the data that is used in the funding model that determines how much state funding each district gets. For those of you that have served on education committee or spent much time looking at the model, there is a lot of data in that model. And so that's pretty heavy lift looking through all of that data and auditing school districts. But it is solely focused on looking at the data that goes into the model. All school districts are also required on an annual basis to get a CPA audit, which looks at whether or not they're reporting their financials in accordance with required accounting standards. And again, so that has a specific objective as well. There's a little bit of overlap between our function and their function, but generally what they're looking at is purely financial. Whereas, for instance, if we're looking at transportation expenditures, we're looking to see, are they accurate and are they reimbursable? A CPA audit will not care whether or not a transportation expenditure is reimbursable, simply that it's accurate according to accounting standards. In other words, is it reported in the correct period? Is the amount reported correct? Whereas we'll look at it and say, is this reimbursable according to statute or rule? The other section we have is the state and local government audit section that has 6 auditors and a manager. And so that section is responsible for auditing financial information submitted to us by local governments. And so there's between 900 and 1,000 local governments. Now, not all of those will fall under our purview for audit because statute also requires certain entities to get an annual CPA audit. So all cities, all counties, all special districts who have revenues above $1 million, all hospital districts, they're all required to get CPA audits. So we generally will not audit those so that we're not duplicating effort. We focus our audit resources on those that have revenues below $500,000 and the towns, because towns aren't required to get CPA audits. Some of them elect to get CPA audits, but the ones that don't generally fall into our population for audit. And there's usually between 550 and 600 of those entities that would fall within our purview. A related function that we do to local government is to produce the annual cost of government report that's required by statute. That also is a lot of data. A lot of time goes into that, about 4,000 hours annually. So every local government entity, cities, towns, special districts, boards, have to report their financial information to us. So they report their revenues, they report their expenditures, their cash and investments, their debt. And then of those that are below $500,000, we'll generally do a risk assessment, select some of those to audit, and then we'll go out and audit that financial information for accuracy as well as the related internal controls. Another function of our state and local government section is to do performance measure audits of state agencies. I'll draw a distinction here between what we do and what people normally think of as a performance audit. So most people, when they hear performance audit, they're thinking economy, efficiency type audits. That's more along the lines of what LSO's program division does. Our performance measure audit that is set out in statute is just to audit the performance measures that state agencies are required to develop and report. So for example, we have a performance measure on the accuracy of reporting of local government. And so we would audit just that number as to whether or not that number is accurate. We're not doing a performance audit in terms of are they spending their money the way they should or anything like that. And then we have some other functions that we spread around to staff with availability. The first one of those is assisting law enforcement with investigations. That typically is us providing the forensic audit portion of whatever the allegation is. So law enforcement will contact us and say, hey, we have an allegation of fraud in this entity, and this is some of the details. And then we basically do the forensic part and follow the money. We've also in the past done special requests, whether that be from the legislature, whether that be from specific state agencies on, we would like assistance in terms of you looking at a specific area. So years back, the legislature asked that we audit the school facilities division since inception, all of those expenditures. So we did that. We've had some agencies ask us to look into some of their subrecipients in terms of their accounting procedures and internal controls. We've looked at construction projects and contracts. So we've done some special requests in the past. We also manage the statewide audit contract. So there was some discussion earlier about the CAFR, so the state's financials. So we manage that contract. Every 4 years, we put out an RFP. We get bids, evaluate those bids, select an audit firm, and then the audit firm does the financial audit of the state as a whole, looking at the revenues and expenditures of individual agencies. Now that contract has two parts. The first one is the CAFR, which is the state's financials. The second part is the single audit. And that is required for any entity that expends more than $750,000 a year in federal funds. So same audit firm does the state's financials and the single audit. And then we provide various trainings. We might provide some budget or accounting training to, say, conservation districts or weed and pest districts. We also provide presentations to WASBO on the school district side. And then we have a supervising auditor and an IT auditor that kind of help out with our other functions. So our supervising auditor is our liaison for the statewide audit, generally does our special requests audits, also does our internal quality control review. And then our IT auditor has been focused mostly on school districts. We felt that that's where he could provide the most value, is looking at usually smaller districts that might not have the same size of staff as your larger districts in terms of IT. In terms of other audit entities within the state, I think there's a number of state agencies that have internal audit functions that are looking at something specific related to their agency. So for example, DOT has an internal review section that looks at stuff related to their agency. The Wyoming Retirement System has an internal audit function. So I think a number of agencies have internal audit functions, whether they be formal or informal. And then you have the CPA firms around the state that do a lot of the auditing. Those range in size from small to large. I think what we're finding is they have the same issues we do in terms of capacity. We're getting special districts, for example, that are needing audits because statute requires it, and they're just not getting any CPA firms to submit bids, or they might get one bid. I know we've had some instances of where CPA firms have been contacted to do audits or reviews, and the CPA firms don't have capacity to take on additional work. So, and then in terms of an update of issues that we've discussed in this committee in previous meetings. So as of December 31st of 2020, which is the deadline for census reporting, we had 13 entities, 11 special districts, 2 towns who had not submitted all of their census paperwork to us. Currently, that's down to 3 or 4, and those are just the entities that are in process of dissolution. As of April 1st, which is the deadline to submit CPA reports to us, there were 36 entities that had not submitted either their CPA report or review. That is a lot larger number than in the past, but also somewhat expected due to COVID. If any of you had paid attention to the CAFR and the statewide and the single audit, that's been a slower process this year due to COVID and some of the guidance for how COVID funds should be audited coming out way later than the rest of the guidance. So typically you might get that guidance September, October. The COVID related audit guidance didn't come out till after the turn of the new year. So we are currently down to 25. So there's still 25 outstanding. They have all engaged a CPA firm. But again, CPA firms are having some capacity issues just like us. And so that's just taking time for those audits to be done. And of those 25, 19 are audits and 6 are reviews. So just a little background, an audit is going to be a more detailed look as opposed to a review. A review doesn't do any detail testing like an audit would. You're looking at reconciliations, maybe some data analysis, but you're not looking at internal controls, not doing any testing of internal controls, not doing any testing of specific transactions. And then at the last Management Audit Committee meeting, we talked about the suggestion of adding account numbers to our budget form to mirror our accounting manual. And those changes have been made. So the current budget form that's out there for this current budget cycle does contain those account numbers. And so I also provided to the committee our performance report that's available out on our website that kind of gives you a rundown of the work we did in fiscal year 20. And so we'll have a fiscal year 21 report that'll be updated with current numbers, probably early August. We wait until the current budget cycle is done so we know how many budget forms figure into the financial reports that are processed and analyzed. So with that, I think I would stand for any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chavez. Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Travis, good to see you in a different committee. I just have a quick question. You just went over a whole slew of things that your division does. What's your staff look like? How many people are you having do all this work on a daily basis and yearly basis?
Mr.
Please
Chairman,
proceed.
Representative Brown. So our division is 17 people, and 13 of those are audit positions. So there's 5 audit positions in our school finance function. There's 6 audit positions in our state and local. And then we have the supervising auditor for special projects and our IT auditor. I will say we've got a lot of entities under our purview, and it's difficult to get coverage with what we have. There's literally hundreds of special districts that haven't been looked at by anybody, either no CPA firm because they fall below the $500,000, so that would fall under our purview. But with 6 auditors and 550 entities, there's a lot that go without being looked at.
Please follow up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Travis, just another question on this then. What is your guys' staff? You guys are at 17 now in your division. What does that historically look like when you were able to conduct more studies? What have you guys seen as a reduction in employee count?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown. So when we had the highest staff numbers, we had 8 in our state and local section, so 2 more than we have now. And we also had 8 in our school finance section, so 3 more than we have now.
Mr. Chavez, just to be clear, so that's a change of 5. Is that a change of 5 because of authorization and FTE authorizations and budgeting, or is that a challenge of also hiring and retaining?
Mr. Chairman, that's due to budget cuts, the reduction in 5 positions over the past handful of years. Although we do also experience challenges in hiring. We're at 50% turnover in the last 2 years. And going back to talking about school finance data and the amount of data there, it takes a good 2 to 3 years to have a good handle on the funding model and all of those components. And so turnover really has a pretty negative effect. So we've lost a lot of people and then had difficulty hiring as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Senator Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm trying to remember, it seems to me about maybe 4 or 5 years ago that there were a couple positions were added into the Department of Audit. And the idea was that they would be kind of more junior members, maybe new graduates or other folks like that. No, that bringing those along. My recollection was that, and I could be wrong, my recollection was that turned out it wasn't very practical, and that was they just took too much. It didn't work very well for the department, and it took too much time to try and train some of the newer ones. Am I remembering that wrong? But is that, and the other part of my question, Mr. Chairman, is that part of the five reductions were down? It seemed like there were 2 or 3 of those positions that ultimately the department didn't want them and let them go as part of that, but maybe I remember wrong.
Mr.
Chavis,
Chairman,
please.
Senator Perkins. So those 3 additional were in our excise tax division. And Director Reif probably can speak to those better than I can in terms of how those positions, what's been done with those
Okay,
positions.
so, Mr. Chairman, they
Please,
weren't in the
Tom.
public audit. They were in the excise tax. Okay, all right, thank you. That clears that up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Gray?
Yes, thank you, Speaker Barlow. Mr. Chavez, thank you for your presentation. Wanted to ask you about, obviously, there's a deterrent function that the Department of Audit has in preventing potential bad actors or potential bad behavior, and in the fact that there's this question of when a random audit could occur. But want to ask you in your time, and I know you've served a long time in this position, what are some of the maybe top 2 or 3 things that you've seen come through the public funds division that have really changed the ball game and saved the taxpayers money and brought efficiency to state government? If you give 2 or 3 examples, just want to play it out concretely how it works over there, and thank you.
Mr. Chavis.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray. So I don't know that our function is efficiency focused. It's more compliance focused. So the efficiency type audits would be more your traditional performance type audits. And so those don't fall under our purview. In terms of our own internal processes, we've tried to automate as much as we can so that we can spend more time doing analysis rather than just data compilation or data processing. But in terms of efficiency of other entities, that's not the type of audits that statute charges us with.
So
Representative Gray, please follow up. I know you've got one.
thank you, Mr. Speaker. So what are 2 or 3 examples on the fiscal audits where you've just seen savings? And I can think of some off the top of my head, but I want to pose it to you. I mean, I just want to see in your career 2 or 3 times where we saved the taxpayers some money or identified some real problems in the way public funds were being expended.
Mr. Chairman.
Please proceed.
Representative Gray. So we've had instances of where we've identified fraud in our audits. And so then those move forward to investigations in terms of that have then led to convictions and money being recovered. I think, again, beyond that, we look at internal controls to make sure that the entities we are looking at have proper internal controls to minimize the risk that state dollars are stolen.
It's getting a phone a friend. It's not coming through. All right, thank you. Please, Senator Perkins.
So I'm just trying to remember a few that I read about. For example, up in Trona County, Whedon Pest, there was a significant embezzlement that occurred up there in the Whedon Pest District up there in, probably about 10 years ago. Did the audit have any part of that, Mr. Chairman?
Please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Perkins, I would defer to Rich.
Mr.
I don't know
Cummings,
if
you're up.
if we did anything with the Trona Whedon Pest.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Perkins, I don't think that we were involved in that particular one. We weren't brought in on that, from what I recall.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Chairman,
Please.
if I may, it's just hard to know for a couple of reasons. One is sometimes it's the local auditor, sometimes it's y'all. And then the other thing that happens is And if you could explain, I think it might be helpful if you explain, if you find some embezzlement or fraud or other type of potential wrongdoing, and then you flag that, what is the step? I mean, if I know enough about the IRS to know that if that happens, the audit function kind of stops, and then it's turned over to a criminal investigation division who takes it from there, so that you're not you don't end up without search warrants doing things you might not otherwise be able to do. How does that work in our state government, in your department?
Mr. Chavez,
Mr.
please
Chairman.
proceed.
Senator Perkins. So generally, if it's one of our audits where we've identified potential fraud or embezzlement, we then contact DCI. So we will, depending on the situation, we may stop the audit, we may separate the audit and have a separate investigation. But when we run into it, our next step then is to contact DCI, give them the details on what we've run into. They'll look at what we've given them, and then generally they'll tell us where they want us to go from there.
So, Mr. Chairman?
Please
So
proceed.
you do participate in, but but your function then changes? Is that what I understood?
Please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Perkins, yes, then we shift focus to that specific area.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, one
Please.
last question. And then, so with respect to the taxpayer who becomes the target of what was an audit that now is an investigation, do they get any kind of warning, or do they have any kind of, I mean, is it obvious to them, or do they get a letter? How does that work from them, or is it a little bit of a sneak attack, or how does that work?
Mr. Chavez.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Perkins, I think it probably depends on the circumstances of the specific fraud that's going on. And I don't know if DCI, what their process is for notifying potential investigation or investigatee.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Senator Grew.
You have personal
Thank you.
experience.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah. First, I'll start by helping out my good friend, the chairman, answer his question. You do get a letter. I was audited, and when you get audited by the state auditor, you get a letter, and it spells out any deficiencies that are done, and then it's taken up by the Department of Revenue, and then in my case, it worked into a 7-year running legal gun battle, but that's a different story. But the questions I have, if I may, Mr. Chairman, I want to make sure I understand this right. Mr. Interim Director, you're picked by a group of, it sounds like the SLIB board, and then approved then, if made permanent in this position, then it goes to the Senate for approval for consent on that. Is it true?
Please proceed.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Reif.
Yes, that's correct. It's those three, and it's 2/3 majority, and then it goes to the Senate for confirmation. And there's some reasons why then that director can or can't be removed.
Okay, follow up, please proceed.
And then Mr. Chavez, for you, it sounds like a lot of your work is directed by statute. So the legislature directs you, even though you're a state department, we direct you in a lot of the directions that you end up going and the work that you do. Would you consider that an accurate statement?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Guru, yes.
Follow up, please.
You talked about being able to, or having to do special projects, when requested, we do this, when requested, we do that. Do those requests come usually from committees of the legislature? Do they come from the governor's office? And or other places? And if so, how do you triage that? How do you decide how that works exactly? Just give me a flavor for it.
Mr. Chavez.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Guru. So I'd say most of our special requests historically have come from specific agencies. We've had a couple from the legislature, but mostly from state agencies. And so it kind of depends on what the special request is and what our availability is in terms of deciding whether or not to go forward, or if we do decide to go forward, how to go forward. So if there's some overlap or other entity that might be better suited, then we'll direct the agency that direction. If it's something that is well suited for us, then we might take it on. So we've had some recently where we might say, okay, well, what's your timeline for needing this to be done? We can do it, but we might not be able to get to it until we complete this and this. So it kind of depends on the circumstances of the specific request.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Perkins.
So, and following up on that, I mean, for example, when the legislature changes or modifies, which it has last few years, thank you, the Fiscal Procedures Act, that directly affects your workload to some degree, doesn't it?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Perkins, it could. So for example, a couple years back, when there was the Special District Task Force, and some of the special district statutes were consolidated, and how that was consolidated then made some other districts subject to some audit requirements that they wouldn't normally be subject to. So that can affect our workload. If any new types of special districts, for example, are authorized, they then fall under our reporting statute and become part of our pool for potential audit. So yeah, changes could affect our workload.
And Mr. Chairman,
Please proceed.
if I can follow up that again, thank you. And then, for example, in there, we've changed, that's where the threshold is about if you're above a certain size, you've got to have an independent audit. If you're below a certain size, you can have a review. If you're below that, then it falls into your lap. That's pretty much the statute that directs that, isn't that correct?
Please
Mr.
proceed.
Chairman, Senator Perkins, yes.
And then, Mr. Chairman,
Please.
one more follow-up. And then the other thing we've done over the years is there's been some times where we simply kind of exempted certain special districts. I think fire district comes to mind, that we've exempted some fire districts from some of the requirements that other special districts have had with respect to their audit. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Perkins, yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Just to remind ourselves, the thresholds are over 1 million, 500 to 1 million, and then less than 500. And then with the exception that there are exemptions and exceptions to exemptions.
Mr. Chairman, in general, yes. There's one other threshold. Any special districts that are below 25,000 have fewer requirements than 25,000 to and above.
Okay, thank you very much. So any other questions? So I have a couple of questions, and this will lead into our next topic, which is special district audit follow-ups, which our staff will kind of walk us through. But you have 13 districts or 13 local governments, 11 special districts, 2 towns. And you said that some of them were in the process of dissolution. So are we talking about towns that are potentially dissolving or just special districts? That seems like I've never heard of a town deciding they didn't want to be a town anymore. So I just wanted to be clear about that because it would be quite interesting just to understand that. But so I just want to clarify that. And then I'll just go ahead and do the second one. The 36 that did not submit the April deadline CPA reports. I mean, this committee followed up last year because you weren't getting feedback from them. So if there's an interest in having this committee follow up with some of these, either the 13 or the 36, and I know you broke that down into 19 audits, 6 reviews, et cetera. I guess I would appreciate, knowing that if there's something there. So first one is on who's dissolving or what kind of districts are dissolving. And then on the second one on the CPA reports, obviously that they're at a higher threshold, higher funds dollar levels. And is there something there this committee could assist with? So Mr. Chavez.
Mr. Chairman, so the 3 or 4 that are in process of dissolution are special districts, no towns. And then on the CPA reports, I think we're making progress there. I don't get the sense that we're getting entities that just are refusing to have it done. I think it's more capacity issues in terms of CPA firms having availability to do that. That is one area where we do have some recourse. Statute says that we can basically contract for the audit to be done if they don't get it done. So generally all it takes is us sending them a letter that says, if you don't do it, we will. And then that prompts them to do it. There is a little bit of, I'll describe as a hiccup with that statute, because if we contract for the audit to be done, we still then have to follow procurement rules. So we can't just select an audit firm to have it done. Depending on the dollar amounts, we have to go through the whole procurement process, which makes it a little bit difficult to use that power, I guess I would say.
Thank you. Just to follow up on that. So how often have you had to do that in the last several years? How often do you do these where you have to get an auditor to do an audit on an entity that is not forthcoming with theirs?
Mr. Chairman, we haven't had to actually go to that step. Usually it's sufficient to send the entity a letter that says, if you don't, then statute says we have to, and then that usually prompts them to engage an audit.
Okay, thank you. Further, any follow-up, any other questions? Any other questions? All right, anything further? Director, Mr. Chavez, Mr. Cummings? Nope. All right, so I think we're going to do the audit follow-ups on the 3 or 4 districts, and then I think we'll have maybe the staff's going to give us some suggestions on some enforcement type things, and so hopefully you can stay around a little bit longer and give us some feedback on those things. And we'll actually probably, well, we'll see how long this next section takes. So members, so thank you very much, and we'll have I think, I'm not sure who's coming up to do the quick run through, but if our staff will come up. So these were follow-ups to that, similar to what we were just talking about, the 13 that didn't send in their information. And at the time, Chairman Perkins, I think there were, I can't remember how many letters we sent out to districts saying, hey, follow up, we want this information, and they slowly trickled in. And so we're down to, I think we've received responses, and then we can have a discussion about one of them wanting to dissolve. Ms. Bodewins.
Mr. Chairman, these were actually, we selected about 10, what we would phrase bad actors, ones that had egregious audit findings over the years. And so we followed up on those. They were not recent. They're pretty old, some of them.
Okay, my apologies. My apologies. These were the findings were things we wanted to follow up. My apologies. So Ms. Smith, please proceed. And we can do this at a high level, just we don't have to go through every document, but at a high level, whether we think they're responding, and if the committee has questions, all this material was in your packets. The level irrigation district, of course, was in a little different format, which we can talk about as well. But please, Ms. Smith, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you mentioned, there were 3 districts outstanding that had not responded to us. And so we sent certified return receipt letter from the chairman, letting them know that they needed to respond. We provided the documents from previous correspondence so they would see what we were asking and that we'd been asking for it. We got return receipts from 2 of the entities. That would be, the 3 entities are Highlands Hanover Irrigation District, Lovell Irrigation District, and Laramie County Fire District number 6, which is the Burns Hillsdale District. I got return receipts from Highland, Hanover, and the Lovell Irrigation District. Laramie County never picked up their envelope, and it was finally returned to us this last week. But we hadn't received responses as of the time that we were preparing the packets, so none of them were on time responding to us. So we contacted county commissioners. So I contacted a Laramie County commissioner, a Bighorn County commissioner, and a Washakie County commissioner, and told them that what the situation was, and that we were not looking forward to subpoenaing the special district, and we didn't think that they were either. And so they, each commissioner contacted the entity, and Highland Hanover provided quite a bit of information. As you see, they had their policies and everything in line. Laramie County, I had to email the county commissioner a copy of what was requested, and so he forwarded that on to the fire district, and so they responded appropriately with their 1-page letter. And then with Lovell, it took a couple of additional phone calls, and I received an email that I didn't think you would find sufficient, as I had gone through and compared that with the audit response. And so I outlined, you can see the whole email trail. I outlined the areas that I thought were remiss and received an update on that. Invited him to come and participate if he wanted. And I think the response was he just wanted to give us that information per email. So that's what you have in your packet. That's where we are. I think you will find that the Highland, Hanover, and the Laramie County Fire District are sufficient.
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 The Highland and Laramie were sufficient. Level was maybe not as detailed or as what we had requested. And then the final one we'll get to here in just a moment. So any questions on the first two or on the first three that are on our list? Highland, Hanover, Laramie County's number 6, level irrigation. Committee, questions? All right. So let's go to the Park County. I think if it's that time, let's go to Park County now. And then we'll come back and see if there's anything we want to follow up on with the level. Ms. Bodewins.
Mr. Chairman, with respect to the Park County Parks and Recreation Board, that was the district where the department.
Closer to you, please. Your microphone.
That was the district. Oh, yeah. That was the district that the Department of Audit had said that there was a loophole, perhaps. The Attorney General's office had said they didn't need to dissolve. So I followed up. There was not actually a written opinion, although I suppose if there was, they wouldn't tell me. But from my understanding, there's not a formal written opinion from the Attorney General on this issue, but they did provide legal advice. And essentially what they were saying is the 91507, the specific words are the special districts in accordance with the 2229-401 shall seek dissolution. Well, that in accordance language, I believe, because I haven't actually seen it, the Attorney General's office looked at 2229-401, and that falls under the Special District Elections Act, and Parks and Recreation Boards are not under the Special Districts Act. Special Districts Election Act. It lists several of the special districts that are in the act, and it says other districts as provided by law. So one could argue that yes, this 91507 says by law they follow it, but the way it's being interpreted is that it's not. So I guess that's a question to the committee, as if whether the legislative intent, regardless of what it was at that time, if there's a desire to change that or potentially close that to provide clarification.
Senator Perkins.
I mean, so thank you, Mr. Chairman, Abigail, thank you for that. The question I had when I was reading that last night was, I couldn't think of one, but is there a reason why recreation districts would be different with respect to their, why they would be treated differently than our special districts who fail to comply with some of the requirements which ultimately the nuclear option is dissolution. But is there any reason that you came across in your study that would indicate that they were singled out intentionally?
Ms. Bodewins, please.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Perkins, I'm not sure that I think the intent was likely that it's, there's different words that LSO uses in accordance with. Perhaps the better term that we should have put in this statute was in the manner prescribed by. So you're not directing someone to this statute, but you're saying use this tool within this other statute. I don't know why. I understand perhaps there's a reason why Parks and Recreation Boards are not in the Special Districts Election Act. My guess is their enabling statutes already address those issues. They have their own. But I don't know why they wouldn't be addressed in the 9-1-507 in terms of the audit requirements. Most special districts are not singled out. Conservation districts a little bit, but I think the intent was to have comprehensive reform back in 2017.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Guru.
Thank you, Abigail, or this is for anybody, but have we heard anything from Park County on this?
Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Bodewins.
Senator Grew, I did reach out to the Park County attorney, and basically what they said is that it's a 100-year-old Parks and Recreation Board. They didn't want to dissolve it. And I think they were looking for an interpretation that would allow that. And apparently there's enough ambiguity in the law that they were able to do that.
Thank you.
Ms. Bodwin, would you remind the non-compliance issue, or maybe we have the agency, what was the issue that would lead to a dissolution? I know it's in the materials, but just for the committee, just a quick summary of it, please.
Mr. Chairman, committee, I believe, so the non-compliance is if they fail to send in their annual report, financial report, and Department of Audit can correct me if I'm wrong, but if they fail to send in the required report, they have deadlines, and after a certain amount of time, then the Department of Audit certifies to the Board of County Commissioners that they need to seek dissolution according to this other statute.
Okay, and that's why I just want to confirm that. So Mr. Cummings or whoever would like to, I guess, is there any updates from that that the Department of Audit has received? So not subsequent to the conversations we've had, but have they actually come in compliance for the previous years or succeeding years with audits? Or they dysfunction or non-functional? I shouldn't say dysfunctional. Come on up front so we can get it on the, please, Mr. Cummings. And introduce yourself when you do, please.
Mr. Chairman, Rich Cummings with the Wyoming Department of Audit. I gotta go. Yeah, that was part of the process. And when they were working things through, they quickly got into compliance by submitting the annual report. And then we had discussions about it as to whether or not they were going to continue to dissolve or work through the dissolution process. And that's where they had requested guidance on that, legal guidance and stuff.
So to be clear, they are still functioning. They're still receiving public funds, expending public funds. And now they're in compliance with or at least subsequent to this letter and that particular year. And I'm sorry, I don't remember the year that this was reflective of, but so basically right now they're in compliance with the statute. Is that what your interpretation would be, Mr. Cummings?
Mr. Chairman, they are at this point.
All right, thank you very much for that clarification. So probably the question for the committee maybe later in the day is, do we want to give more clarification on what districts make sure that all districts would be eligible for dissolution for noncompliance? That's a bill draft type of an approach. The other thing I found interesting was that once our staff contacted the county commissioners in respective communities, things moved along pretty quickly. So maybe there's also another trigger, having former county commissioners on this committee that like local control, maybe there's another lever that we could opt for besides dissolution, that we could let the county commissioners require the audit and then make them bring that to the audit agency. So I don't know if our county commissioners want more, former recovering county commissioners want more power. Senator Perkins.
Mr. Chairman, I don't think it's about power. Ultimately, it's just about compliance. I mean, the money that they're taking out of the hardworking people's pockets, and they ought to use it what they're using for. And these audits are intended to make sure that that's happening. And so whether you've been around for 100 years or whether you've been around for 1 year, you gotta, if you're going to take the public's money, you got to answer to the public. You got to dance the dance, and it's just that simple. And so, I mean, that's exactly kind of why we went down this road and why we've done that, and we're getting some response. And I don't know that we have to change or do anything earth shattering. Ultimately, what it is we continue. I think, and we had a little bit of talk about this last year, was continue to do this thing. I think this is an important function for management audit, that we get those things. I think we have a couple tools, and we can shine some brighter light on it, some things that the Department of Audit can't do. We have some ability to do that. And ultimately the end result isn't to dissolve people or cause problems. The end result is simply comply. Show us that you're following you're in compliance with your internal controls, that you're spending the money right, that it's not that, your vouchers are right, that you're signing your perjuries on when you're seeking reimbursement, you're signing your perjury statements. all those things everybody else has to do when they're spending taxpayer money. It's just, so I don't know if we need to do anything different, maybe tweak the one little loophole thing to make sure that they comply. But other than that, I think this is exactly kind of why we talked about this a couple of years ago and started down this road, just to try and make sure that make sure that if they're going to take the taxpayer money, that they do what they're supposed to do when they get it. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And I shouldn't have used the word power. I should have used the word responsibility, with the commissioners like greater responsibility. Senator Grew.
Yeah, I think, I recall going to as a commissioner, in our Parks and Rec department, it was kind of a, just down in the third drawer in the office, they had a shoebox, and that's where they kept the money for the softball team or whatever. Well, we went from that to a multi-million-dollar recreation center, and we tell them we had to get rid of the shoebox and start, doing it right. But we went through that through an audit process, that our yearly audit process that the county went through, and they flagged it first about the shoebox. So it wasn't us, it was them. But then, we kind of got it all straightened out. It seems to work out pretty well.
Thank you. So responsible shoeboxes. That's what we've got from this part. So thank you very much. I guess as a follow-up, I'm just, does the Department of Audit have any of these, either the December or the April reports out of this current? One of the things that we went way back, we went several years back on some of these. We were looking backwards, finding ones with more egregious type things. So I guess my question is, out of these current ones or anything, is the Department of Audit, you just nod your head one way or the other and I'll affirm. Is there any special districts, cities, towns, counties, or any other ones that are in the audit that you think that this committee should be aware of and should maybe exercise some inquiry with? Okay, so I think that at this time, there's no suggestions that there may be a couple others that we need to follow, any others we need to follow up on based on audit findings or lack of compliance. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much. So maybe it's, we're just a few minutes ahead, but I think we can maybe get our audit folks, audit division folks, audit agency folks out of here if we maybe just hit this next one. And let's try to get it out, and then you guys won't have to stay through the break. So if we can do that real quick, Ms. Bodewins, you're going to give us some, I guess we've already kind of summarized it, some suggestions on the audit requirements, enforcement and training stuff. Oh, Amanda's coming up. So just give us the high level walk through this, give us the policy options, and then we'll take any public comment. And I should have asked, was any public comment? Is there anybody online, Amanda, for anything? Okay.
No, Mr. Chairman.
I'm going to assume nobody online and nobody in the audience. There's no public comment on these unless we get, I will try to do a better job of asking. But let's do those policy options, enforcement and training, and then we'll get any feedback we have from the agency, and then we'll take our break. So
Thank
Amanda,
you, Mr.
please.
Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, and members of the Management Audit Committee. I'm Amanda Freund, and I'm going to be
Freund.
going over the research memo included in your meeting materials, local government audit requirements, training and enforcement. This memo provides an overview of the research provided to the committee pertaining to local government audits during the 2019 and 2020 interims, and identifies and analyzes policy alternatives for the committee should it choose to continue with this topic during this interim. A lot of the background information for the Department of Audit has already been discussed by the Department of Audit, so we will slowly go through the next part of the memo, which touches on the two issues related to local government audits that were identified through the research. These two issues were a lack of training for both local government personnel handling public funds and the oversight bodies, and then a lack of enforcement mechanisms. So first, we're going to discuss just like the training and resources. Wyoming does not require local government fiscal officers to complete state fiscal procedure training. However, the state does require the Department of Audit to instruct county and municipal officers in keeping proper mode of keeping accounts. To fulfill its statutory duty to provide training, the Department of Audit Public Funds Division does provide financial training resources
on their website, and these are included in the accounting manual, census manual, special district handbook, and the Wyoming municipal handbook. They further include the Wyoming legislature and the Secretary of State's website to provide easy access to statutes and administrative rules pertaining to audit requirements. In addition, those fiscal officers can seek training through the Wyoming State Auditor in conjunction with the State Treasurer's Office. They launched a new training program aimed at increasing knowledge of audit standards and compliance for local government entities. In addition, there's several associations around Wyoming that do provide resources online and in-person and online trainings. One of the newest forms of training is provided by the Wyoming Association of Special Districts. They launched a new online training program designed to help special districts become more familiar with laws and procedures involved in managing the districts. We also looked at several states. At the August 2020 Management Audit Committee meeting, LSO presented on other states' fiscal procedure training requirements for local governments, and then examined the statutory requirements of Wyoming and 9 comparator states. Like Wyoming, 5 of those states require an agency, division, or local or a section of the state government to provide fiscal procedures training or guidance. However, it's not mandatory that the fiscal officers actually attend the training. 2 states do require local government officials or employees to complete fiscal training. Utah requires local district board members to complete training within a year of taking office, and Nebraska requires city treasurers to complete annual continuing education approved by the state auditor of public accounts. Idaho and North Dakota do not have requirements for local government fiscal training or provision of guidance materials. Rather, professional associations in those 2 states do offer local government and political subdivision training. So we looked at some policy options that the committee could consider in moving forward if it chose to do so. Requiring fiscal procedure training for employees, especially board members responsible for providing oversight to these government entities and its employees, could mitigate the trends that were found and identified when reviewing the audits. This could come in form of initial training for new fiscal officers and board members, or continuing education training. A lot of trainings, especially currently, are being provided online and cost-free, which could make it more convenient for these employees or board members to apply. An alternative method for mandatory training for all board members and employees could require training for those entities that, following an audit in the Department of Audit, believes may benefit from the training, requiring those entities to go to a training. We're now moving on to the second trend that was found in our research that was provided to the committee over the last 2 interims, which is enforcement. And this falls into 2 separate categories. We have enforcement of reporting requirements, and then we have enforcement of audit requirements and findings. So Wyoming's current enforcement mechanisms are directed at ensuring audits and reports are completed. Wyoming counties, cities, towns, and special districts are required to report revenues received and expenditures made each fiscal year to the Department of Audit by the end of September. And they kind of went through those requirements previously. But if you have any questions, we can go over those as well. If not, I'll continue. Okay. So like those county, cities, and towns, special districts also have to certify their expenditures to the Department of Audit in a report as well. If they are non-compliant, failure to comply within these 4 cities, towns, and municipalities or counties may also result in withholding of funds from the state treasurer. So for special district, failure to comply with these can result in the county treasurer withholding of any further distribution of money to the district until the Department of Audit certifies to the county treasurer that the district is in compliance. So when we looked at different states in October 2020, we reviewed 8 states' audit and financial reporting requirements. And statutory enforcement mechanisms for compliance tend to be directed at ensuring that the audit is performed and the required reports are submitted. Like Wyoming, several states direct the state or county treasurer to withhold funds, publish a notification in a local newspaper of noncompliance, and contract out an audit to be completed at the expense of the non-compliant entity. Arizona, Montana, and Nebraska do permit citizen action in court to compel compliance with the law and assess attorney fees at the cost of the public entity should they be proved to be in violation of law. Nebraska does make its municipal officers personally liable for non-compliance. However, dissolution of districts does not appear to be an option for non-compliant special districts in other states. Montana appears to be the only state of those reviewed that directs their Department of Administration to conduct follow-ups with respect to audit findings and recommendations. And these entities are required to submit a detailed corrective action plan to the Montana Department of Administration. So looking at policy alternatives for consideration of enforcement mechanisms, like I stated, fall into two main categories: enforcing reporting requirements and then enforcing the audit recommendations. In terms of enforcement mechanisms for financial reporting requirements, dissolution seems to be effective tool for those who are not filing reports simply because they are no longer fully operational entities. For districts who serve a purpose, dissolution of the district by the Board of County Commissioners may only harm those citizen members of the district who rely on these districts for their services. Further, dissolution of special districts requires a determination by the Board of County Commissioners that dissolution is the best interest of the community and the people of the county. If the special district still serves a purpose, the county may not dissolve a non-compliant district. Wyoming is very consistent with many other states in that statute requires funds to be withheld until an entity comes into compliance. However, as noted in previous testimony over the years, often an entity's funds derive off fees which do not pass through a county treasurer's office. So one potential avenue to encourage further compliance with state financial reporting requirements could be to expand the withholding of fund requirements to require all state agencies to withhold funds until a district has complied with a mandatory reporting requirement. One avenue some states take is to allow citizen lawsuits to be brought against the local government entities. This form of enforcement would allow those citizens within a district to have recourse to ensure their elected officials are complying with state statute. And then a hybrid option between what other states are doing and what Wyoming currently has in place could be to have the local Board of County Commissioners pursue the lawsuit in lieu or in addition to pursuing dissolution. Another enforcement tool that some states use is assessing a non-compliance fee on non-compliant entities or initiate a special audit at the cost of the non-compliant entity or special district. Enforcement mechanisms for audit findings and recommendations are a little bit more difficult to address because the audit findings and recommendations are simply just recommendations from the Department of Audit. Further complicating the issue, which was previously stated by the Department of Audit at previous meetings, is the fact that smaller districts and towns cannot fully comply with proper fiscal procedures requirements simply due to lack of staff. Internal control issues such as segregation of duties and internal controls issues typically arise when there are a limited number of staff available to carry out the financial duties of a district or a town. Follow-up by the Department of Audit with non-compliant entities may enhance compliance with the audit findings, or like Montana, the department could work with districts to develop corrective action plans. However, due to the number of audits that do fall on the responsibility of the Department of Audit each year, both options would likely require additional staff within the Department of Audit. So training an oversight board on the duties and responsibilities to aid the oversight board in providing the oversight of those officers handling state money may help to alleviate problematic audit findings. At this time, I stand for any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Questions from Samantha? Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In your review of other states, did you find any examples of carrots or incentives or rewards for entities who are getting their reports in on time, who are going through these trainings? So I'm just hearing enforcement or sticks, but I'm wondering if there's a more positive approach that we could take.
I think the positive approach is we don't write them letters. Would that not be a carrot? All right. Please follow up.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Sherwood, not that I recall.
There are no carrots. It's a short growing season. Representative Brown.
Thank you. Amanda, I'm kind of curious on this. This is a kind of a big deal in my book, especially after looking back at some of the stuff that we've received in this packet here. I'm a little shocked that we don't have any public testimony from WHAM or the County Commissioners Association, the people, as we talked about in this, that there was some level of engagement from the elected officials, number one, but number two, it seems that we have, our county treasurers have their association. Was there any discussion with these individuals as you were writing out on this, with those people that are ultimately responsible for this? Was there any discussion with those throughout our state?
Ms. Amanda.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, I'm going to hand this over to Abby to answer.
Ms. Podewins.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, the County Commissioners Association and WHAM and the Treasurers Association have been involved in past meetings. I'm not sure, there must have not been anything on the agenda they felt like they needed to be here for today, but they have provided testimony. If you go back through the minutes, you'll see that it's there, as well as the Special District Association.
And I think we actually have some testimony later from somebody more associated with the special districts. It'll be remote. Okay. Nope. Senator Perkins, and then Senator Perkins. Go ahead, Senator Perkins. Please proceed.
You're the chairman. Yes, Mr. Chairman. I was wondering, as you were doing some research of what other states did you come across were there any statistics or anything you found with respect to compliance about if any particular consequence that you found in another state had any better effect than others?
Mr. Chairman.
Please proceed.
Senator
Please
Perkins.
proceed.
We simply did a statutory review of other states' statutes of what they offer. We did not dig into the details of what they, calling them up, seeing what their Department of Audit folks thinks works or doesn't work.
Okay, follow up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The other thing, if I remember right, is one of the things we talked about, and oftentimes we have I remember we had the two ladies come and talk to us. I think one was from Pavilion and the other one was from, I can't remember. But anyway,
Upton.
What's that?
Upton, I believe.
Upton. Yeah. And so anyway, they came and they were talking about this fact that, you don't have enough people to have a separation of duties, which is always, so you're never going to have an audit that you don't get dinged with the fact that you don't have sufficient internal controls because you can't do the separation of duties. But my other recollections, we discussed that was one of the place that you want, or the place that could come into the board or the overlying town council, if it's a town, or if it's a district, the board. And I think one of the other things that we found was that we didn't have boards. They're either one trained or two that ever took much of a look at what the treasurers do. Is that what you remember?
Ms. Podewins.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Perkins, that's correct. And when writing up this paper, we talked to the Department of Audit, and they really emphasized the need for the oversight body to have the training. I think Senator Guru's example is perfect. As the county commissioner, they made sure that their small district was complying. And I think that's the same in terms of these small special districts. They might not have the staff to do the internal controls, but they do have board members, at least 5 of them, I would assume, that could open those unopened bank statements, do the reconciliation, but they need to know how to do that. They need to know they're supposed to do that. A lot of times these board members don't even know their responsibilities as government officials. I think they don't even see themselves as government officials to some extent.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Further questions, and I'll just ask if the department has anything that they, in talking with their colleagues, because they talk probably with their colleagues in other parts of the state and other states, if they have anything that they would suggest out of these policy options that might be of benefit in both their dealings and what they interact with their other entities. So anything else from the committee for our staff?
That, Mr. Chairman?
Yep, please, Senator Perkins.
So one of the other things we talked about, I think one of the things, I don't know if it's in this document or a different document, but one of the policy considerations you came up with the fact that we still have a lot of grant programs that we do. And I think one of the policy considerations you also suggested was potentially what if that compliance is, and this may be a carrot issue, but one of the requirements to be successful in grant applications, whether it was, out of Water 1 or Water 2, or whether it was from the SLIB or whatever it was, that they be in compliance at the time they make the application, or at least by the time it's awarded. I mean, I think that was that later in this document, or is it in a different document?
Ms. Bodewins.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Perkins. So last January, December, Jonathan Sandoval, he prepared a paper that had a chart. We looked at the 10 we sent letters to, actually. I think those are the 10 districts we picked. And we just went back through working with the state auditor's office of how much state money has gone from agencies or natural resource trust fund accounts, SLIB, has gone to these districts that we've been looking at. And we totaled up, and that number, it is mentioned in this document. I think it was approximately $5.3 million. And that was, I think we looked at 10 years. I could be wrong. 5-year period. So it's $5 million in a 5-year period. And that was money going directly from the state through various entities to the special district. So not going through the county treasurers and that's where if you put a hold on county treasurer funds, unless it's a property assessment or something, they don't have control over that. But these state dollars, you could actually hold them at the state level.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Further questions? All right. So Director, if you don't have anything to offer, or any of your folks, I understand that, but come on up if you do. Any suggestions out of these enforcement? We have maybe an expanded ability to withhold funds, publishing the notice, eligibility for other funds, that kind of goes to the other one, and then the reporting and the audit recommendations enforcement. So go ahead, Mr. Chavez.
Mr. Chairman, so just kind of following up with Senator Perkins' question on grant type stuff. So one thing that has really increased compliance in terms of reporting is when state lands started contacting us before they would award grant money. They would contact us and say, hey, is this entity in compliance? And they had to be in compliance before they would release the grant funds. Now, state lands is the only entity that does that, the only entity that contacts us. And, there are a lot of other agencies that dole out grant funds, but state lands is the only one that contacts us to see if they're in compliance. That could be an option if more agencies would reach out to us in terms of looking at compliance before releasing grant funds, because that did have a positive effect on compliance in terms of what's required to be reported to us when state land started doing that.
So if water development did that, we would probably have any irrigation districts on the list, would we? Just saying. So I guess my observation with it then is probably not statutory or legislative requirement. It's probably a SLIB board requirement or a SLIB board rule. Something SLIB has done, directing Office of State Lands to make sure they are in compliance with the audit division. Do you have any idea about where that comes from? And we'll follow up maybe, but do you have any idea?
Mr. Chairman, as my audit manager described, it's basically a handshake agreement between us and SLIB. I don't think there's anything, at least statutory, that's driven that. Just an informal agreement, if you will, between the agencies.
Thank you. And does that apply to federal funds, all funds, or just general funds, state funds, special purpose funds?
Mr. Chairman, all funds.
Thank you. Thank you. Anything further for the committee? Any questions from the committee? All right. Well, we've got some policy options on the table. So I think at this time, members, We'll take a 15-minute break. So we will reconvene at 10:30.
Oh, man, you're
Thank
making
you.
good decisions. You're making really good decisions, Mr. Speaker. I like your decisions a lot.
All right, members, we'll come back to order. We're pleased to be joined by our, I guess, yeah, let's just go ahead, go with State Auditor. If you're ready, Madam Auditor, with our State Auditor and Deputy State Auditor, Ms. Troutwine. And the State Auditor was listening in to some of our conversations. So she has some feedback on a couple of the items that we're just talking about. So with that, we're pleased to have you with us here. Auditor Racinas, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, my name is Christy Racinas, serving as your state auditor, and I have my deputy, Edie Troutwine, here with me. And I wasn't able to listen in all morning, but I did want to just offer a little commentary on the last item. SLIB in rules does have a requirement that we are not able to consider any entity who is not in compliance with Department of Audit requirements. So that's not, it's not in statute, but it is in our rules. And Mr. Chairman, I started looking through the rules. I think, I know it's MRG grants. I don't know that it's I don't know that it extends to all types of funding we give out.
Okay, thank you very much. So please proceed with, I think, update on the Wolves 4 system and that type of information. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And we have a new committee. Welcome to Cheyenne. I hope you all parked your cars in the underground parking garage in case we get hail. But here's your warning if you haven't. For those of you that don't know, and I think most of you do, but just in case, I want to just do a quick overview about what our office does. There is often a lot of confusion since we are called the State Auditor's Office, but we do not audit, right? That's the Department of Audit. So that begs the question, of course, what do we do? And by statute, we are the chief accountants for the state. So essentially, we pay the bills and keep the books. The auditor also serves as the chief payroll officer, paying all state employees, legislators, National Guard members, judicial branch, et cetera, and is responsible for all the related tax payments and reporting. And that ends up being about 10,000 transactions a month for payroll. Statutorily, we're also required to maintain the state's electronic accounting system. This system provides state agencies with the means to collect revenues, process expenditures, maintain budgets, and complete all other accounting transactions that happen within the state finances. And lastly, my office is also required to provide an annual financial report of the fiscal affairs of the state. We've talked about that with this committee before. The state has a balance sheet and income statement just like a private business would. Only ours is about 250 pages long. It's extremely exciting. We do post it on our website. There is a name change for that I'll go ahead and start using now, and Senator Perkins will know about that. That report for years and years has been known as the CAFR, or the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. It is now most likely going to be called the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, or the ACFR. So that's not a change made by us, but that's coming down from national accounting organizations. So.
Please, Senator.
Just switch the A and the C, so it's
Mr. Chairman,
Wow.
Senator Perkins, yes, it's sort of like if you were to sneeze, that's what it sounds like, ACFR. And Mr. Chairman, the reasoning behind that, accounting standards for quite a few years have becoming more global. And as everything becomes more global, it turns out the prior acronym is actually a extremely derogatory term in some countries of the world. So as businesses become global, they have recognized that that's really not going to be an acceptable term to use globally. So the entities that that put out accounting standards, et cetera, and the entities to which we submit our annual comprehensive financial report are going to that name change.
Thank you. Please proceed.
So one thing I want to clarify as we get into the discussions about the upgrade of our electronic accounting system, and some of you may have heard me talk about this at joint appropriations. Our current vendor is known as CGI. They have been the vendor for the state of Wyoming for going on, well, over 30 years, actually. They've had some name changes, but they've been a longtime vendor of the state. The current contract we're under is 12 years, and it was signed in 2016. So it goes through 2028 at a minimum. So, Mr. Chairman, the item on the agenda was fairly broad, so I'm not sure exactly what you want to hear. So I'm going to give a little brief overview of what my guess is relevant to this committee, and then I'm happy to take questions. So back in 2020, this committee had posed several questions to us about the applicability of that electronic accounting system to potentially smaller entities like counties, municipalities, potentially special districts. And we submitted a letter to this committee in December of 2020. We presented those responses at the December meeting of this committee, but we've gone ahead and re-provided that letter since there's been some turnover and the information is still very much relevant. So in short summary of that letter, our accounting system is most likely too high powered for smaller local governments. And our vendor, CGI, has really recommended that we wait to investigate further until the state of Wyoming has upgraded to version 4.0 of our system, which is the most current, the latest and greatest that they have to offer. And I would really recommend that you review the recommendations in particular on the last page of that letter we issue, and I'll go over them now. I wanted to emphasize that there would have to be a lot of things happening before we started rolling down our accounting system to smaller entities or before that was even possible. So in addition to upgrading to 4.0, I believe there would have to be a pretty robust review of statutes and a survey to understand those local needs. We want to be mindful of those local needs. And I know that previous testimony has been heard at this committee from local entities. Some of them have extremely limited accounting needs. You know, some of them get by actually just fine with very inexpensive off-the-shelf products. So we think that's still a very relevant conversation moving forward, but just want to be upfront with some limitations that we may see. So in regards to the upgrade that we are potentially going to take on, there's been a recognition by well, let me back up a little bit. During the step 2 and 3 budget cuts, we went into intense contract negotiations with this vendor. As I mentioned, we were in a 12-year contract with them. And so they weren't under really a whole lot of pressure to help us out. However, they really came to the table and when I say we, I mostly mean Deputy Troutwine, went to the table and negotiated really hard and was able to get a pretty robust cut to that contract. Now we're still under the 12-year contract, but we got the price lowered. And there's been a recommendation by the vendor that the sooner they get us to their most upgraded version, it saves everyone time and resources. So essentially, if we're on their most current customizable version, we're less work for the vendor. So it's become a situation where the upgrade could be a really great advantage for both us and them. Now, they have verbally offered to provide the upgrade to us at no cost. And again, I give you that backstory. Is it too good to be true? Well, maybe, but the reasoning behind that is we're a very expensive client for them to support. And so that's sort of the reason behind it. We are currently investigating the product to make sure it works for everything that the state of Wyoming needs. They just provided us a test environment of 4.0 about 2 weeks ago, and we're digging into that and having a lot of fun and interfacing with other state agencies to see what works for them. We haven't started formal contract negotiations yet, but if we like what we see and if the product can accommodate the state of Wyoming's customizations and needs, it's likely we would move forward. We think this is a great opportunity. So a very rough timeline. I'm hesitant to put anything in stone. We would potentially move forward with contract negotiations over the summer. And then start initial work on the upgrade in the fall with about a year to a year and a half implementation of 4.0. So, and Mr. Chairman, Edie, did I miss anything really relevant? I'm going to go ahead and stop there so I don't spew too much information and then be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Madam Auditor. Question, Representative Brown first.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good to see you, Madam Auditor. Quick question for you. One of the concerns that's come up in my time in the legislature has been this dichotomy of all state agencies and then YDOT with their own accounting software over here. What's the chances of bringing YDOT on and the rollout of 4.0 and potentially having them start to bridge that gap?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr.
Chairman, Representative Brown, great question. And correct me if I'm wrong, Edie, but that is statutory that they are excluded from CGI. Is that accurate?
Ms. Troutwine, go ahead and introduce yourself if you'd like to respond.
Thank you, Madam Auditor, Chairman Barlow, Representative Brown. I don't know for sure if it's statutory, but I do know that, and many of you may all be aware that YDOT operates on a little bit different accounting schedule than we, the state does. And so currently, it's my understanding that they're using a PeopleSoft software. I am aware that CGI, the current vendor, does support some state clients in both supporting state agencies and their equivalent of YDOTs. So our software could accommodate YDOT. However, I would want to make sure we're investigating to make sure there's not any statutory restrictions or things like that. We have not approached YDOT or anything like that, so would want to do some research and investigation.
Thank you. Representative Gray, you have a query?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Auditor Racines, so wanted to ask you about local governments using the software, special districts. That was very exciting for me last year because it provides the opportunity for all entities of state government to plug into WYOpen. And so it seems like now it's kind of been sort of poured cold water on and you know, what I guess maybe it's, what are some of the steps to get us to the finish line on this and maybe have some bigger entities take this on that have the accounting expertise? I mean, is just to be specific, I mean, is there any way we can get this to the finish line rather than just, you know, talking about it on some entities taking on use of the WYOpen software, local governments, and special districts? Thank you.
Madam Auditor.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, great question. I think I would disagree that cold water has been poured on it. I think it's still a super relevant conversation. We remain excited about exploring that opportunity. You know, last December, we told this committee, gosh, it's going to make a lot of sense to explore this once we get upgraded to 4.0, and that's what we're telling you today. And part of the reasoning is, and again, there's some things we know, some things we don't. Under the current system, moving any entity to our CGI product would require that entity to do business in the exact same way the state does. And that is not something that we can make a local government do. And so an incomplete list of things is, you know, one of the most substantial complicating issues about the way we do business is a biennial budget. I'm not complaining, I like it, but it's unusual and our local governments do not do that. And then one of the other maybe most significant roadblocks I see is we would have to have a standardized chart of accounts. Don't get me wrong, Mr. Chairman, I think that'd be fantastic. I think it's a heavy lift, and I would anticipate that there might be a little pushback to some of that. That's a pretty substantial business change. So if we were at the time where that might be ripe to move forward, I think, as Representative Gray mentioned, I think starting with a larger entity would be good. And I think looking for someone who's game to do it, looking for a volunteer as a pilot project. And Mr. Chairman, the one last thing that we don't know, again, just one complication that would have to be overcome, in the same way that we're under a 12-year contract, I'm guessing that a lot of our locals have some contractual commitments as well.
Thank you. Representative Gray, your hand is still up. Did you have a follow?
Thank you, Speaker. I do have a couple follow-ups. So, Mr. Speaker, thank you. Auditor Racina, so on the second point, wasn't it that CGI was just going to allow us to do the build out for free, just have a new dashboard? That's my recollection from the 2020 conversations. And I mean, in terms of the biennial thing, I mean, we were talking about that in 2020. I mean, are there any answers? Weren't we going to go back to CGI and say, can we do a build out that is annual? And then I have one more follow-up. Maybe I'll just ask it now. I mean, so what are the next steps for the committee to look at maybe moving the process along to get a pilot? Because this is very exciting, but and I do realize it's government, but we are a year into this. And so I just want to be helpful here and us getting this moving here.
Auditor Racines.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, no, good questions. And I understand your frustration with the timeline. And I think the conversations with CGI were they could allow other entities to use our instance of our software. But again, that would require them to use the exact same, it would have to be modeled in the precise same way the state's is. Now, what we're currently exploring, and again, we just got this test environment 2 weeks ago, is what customizations are going to be available when we get into 4.0, and will that environment make it easier for potentially a local to latch on and not have to subscribe to in the same way to everything that the state does?
Okay, thank you. Senator Boner. Oh, wait, Representative Gray, maybe there was something.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I could do one more time. So is there any way we can hurdle the biennial issue? Because I mean, if I'm not sure there's any way for us to convince an entity to do a biennial budget. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but is there any way for us to hurdle the biennial issue?
Auditor Racines, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, we can certainly approach the vendor about that. Again, their conversation has said, wow, it's going to make 1,000 times more sense to have this discussion around 4.0. You're on this high maintenance, hard to maintain some slightly older version. We're a version behind. So, but we can certainly approach them. My guess is that the customization expense would be substantial for that, but it's certainly something we could have a conversation about.
Thank you. Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate the discussion about the timeline here and starting off with maybe a voluntary effort. So I just wondering if you discuss some of the challenges you have to address to get make that come to fruition. I'm just wondering if you spend some time talking about the benefits to a local entity, what they would benefit if once they go through all the effort of complying with this.
Certainly understanding you don't represent a local entity, and we'll have county commissioners and municipalities and other folks, special districts actually be testifying later. But go ahead, and I certainly understand you have expertise that you could offer. So, Auditor Racines.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, great question. And again, any advantages I can come up with would be guesses. but, and I'm sure they'll do a better job of telling you. I mean, obviously, the advantages to us to have this product are to have an online, fully supported, very secure, very high level, very advanced accounting system that is reliable. And again, the security is a big concern for us, so we like that. Now, if I were a local, I would say, well, who's paying for it? Because if the state's going to fund the main system and it's a little cost to a local, then obviously a huge advantage would be financial. And as Representative Gray pointed out, I mean, one of the, and I don't want to get put the cart before the horse, but I think one of the most exciting things is, can we then funnel local information through YOpen, right? To me, that's really a very exciting end game, and that takes a lot off of locals' plate if they don't have to worry about that piece. But Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, I need to be very honest that I'm creating a lot of goals here that have a, you know, that's my perfect vision down the road. So there's a lot of in between technology things that would have to happen.
Senator Perkins, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Auditor, it's always good to see you. How are you today?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Perkins, I'm fantastic. It's good to see you.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
I didn't hear a question. So
Okay,
continue.
thank you. I asked her how she was doing today. A couple of questions, a couple of thoughts I had as you do this. I mean, when you envision this and if it was to work off the same license, I mean, where are we talking about? Is your vision that we have its data stored in the same place? How as we talk about that, particularly if you were going to somehow, if they're going to somehow piggyback off our license, how do we control and own the data and some things like that, as well as you already have access issues, but I think you probably got most of those solved. But I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Auditor Racines.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Perkins, and I want to, be very clear. This is a good idea which should be explored. It was not our idea. It was this committee that brought this idea to us. So I would say it's your vision and not necessarily mine. But along that lines, as far as data storage, I think that's one of those unfun, complicated details that we just have not even addressed.
Mr. Chairman, follow up, and then
please.
I mean, as you think about chart of accounts, I mean, if you're going to go in that direction, would the state have to change its chart of accounts a little bit so that the chart of accounts might be more universal across various, across various users that might be out there? And if so, what kind of challenges does that create for your office?
Madam Auditor.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Perkins, I think having a standardized chart of accounts across the state and all municipalities would be immensely complex. I think it could be done. Of course, we would have to add a lot, hundreds of chart of accounts elements to capture things that happen at the local level that don't happen at the state level. Parking fees, if you don't pick up after your pet, there's no revenue code in our system for that. So standardizing those things would be, I think it'd be one thing to get them standardized across municipalities, but then another to meld that with the state. So that's why I see the chart of accounts as that's one of the more complex things. And I think what we're very hopeful about is, will 4.0 provide enough customization ability to accommodate that? And we're very hopeful it will. We don't know that at this point.
Follow up, Senator Perkins.
And one more, and this is a little bit, this is just because we're talking about it. Ransomware. I'm just wondering where you are with respect to our CGI is and the ability to find and defend against ransomware, both at the state level, at least.
Security. Madam.
Mr.
Auditor.
Chairman, Senator Perkins, and I'm going to have to phone my friend on that one, I think, and maybe talk a little bit about the assurances that CGI provides us through our contract. Again, one of the things where it's beneficial that we are not running this ship entirely by ourselves.
Ms. Troutwine.
Chairman Barlow, Senator Perkins, I can tell you that when the contract was negotiated, the CGI contract was negotiated in 2016, there were very robust security provisions included in that contract. And it's been the auditor and I's experience with CGI that CGI have always maintained security as sort of one of their top priorities. Recently, I think even in the last month, that our vendor has changed their security requirements and are no longer supporting clients, other states that aren't on the most current version of the software as a means to make sure that data is protected, that they as a vendor can protect those clients. So I know that the current vendor is making policy changes. It's like you don't get to be a client of this vendor unless you're, locked into security and are on the most current version. They have, we have servers set up in Arizona where our data lives and is protected there. And I can provide you copies of the provisions in our current contract, but I know from my perspective, I feel very comfortable with where we are related to security and any sort of ransomware attack.
And Mr. Chairman, I would just
Please.
add on, we go through these really fun disaster recovery exercises once a year with the vendor to sort of make sure we're ready if anything were to happen.
And then follow up, then we'll go to Senator Bouchard.
Then, and I just want to make, I think I heard something wrong, but did I hear that unless we move to 4.0, that basically that soon, if not already, they're no longer going to support the security measures that in the version that we have? That is that what I heard? Did I hear that a minute ago?
Ms. Troutwine.
Chairman Barlow, Senator Perkins, I sort of misspoke a little. So we are currently on version 3.11, moving to 4.0. The vendor CGI has recently made a policy change that any client that is on 3.9 or below, which there's actually quite a few states, they will no longer be supporting those clients after a certain period of time. Luckily, Wyoming has kept up on our upgrades and our versions, so we're in a good position. I know that they have recently rolled out 4.0 to several clients, so hopefully, if we research the current product and like it and eventually move there, we'll sort of be middle of the pack with moving on to 4.0.
Thank you very much. Senator Bouchard, question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm concerned about the previous contracts because I've had this extensive discussion about this with the previous auditor and wasn't clear on what that whole package, what we got delivered from that. So I think it would be good for this committee to see all that, what was in there, because I am concerned that you were kind of burdened with some of the stuff that was put into contract and they didn't understand a lot of it. And so that's one thing. It's normal for these type of contractual agreements to move over to an update because that's how these companies keep it flowing for them. But one of the things that I notice here, this company does federal government, states, municipalities. I can't remember the number, but it's in the hundreds. I hear that, how it might be difficult for us to do this at the municipal level, but they do this everywhere. So I just don't see that level of difficulty. So can we, look at maybe some other states that are already implementing the local level to see what's really happening? Because, I used to actually rep for a software company, and sometimes what's being represented isn't always what's happening. So we want to really know what's going on here. So anyway, what's your thoughts about all those things I just said there?
Thank you. Auditor Macinas.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Bouchard, I think everything you said was accurate. We have explored with the vendor what other states are doing, and I think that there's a mixture of things. Most municipalities they support and whatnot are purchasing the software on their own. And they're, we're talking, what's a good example? LA County, right? Like, I don't know if that's actually a client there, but they're counties or municipalities that are as complex and large as Wyoming, but they do have some school districts, I believe, and whatnot. And so I think those are good questions that we're working out with them. What I'm not sure that they have is any instance where they have sort of like a parent with children, but we can certainly follow up and clarify on that. I think it's a good question. And Senator, in regards to the contract, I think maybe a one pager on what that contract encompasses, what they provide and what they don't provide. Would something like that be helpful? And just sort of my general meanderings. I think at first I agreed that I was maybe not overjoyed to be shouldered with a 12-year contract. However, I think there's shown to be some benefits. I know that you all have become extremely frustrated with escalators and these IT contracts that you can't control. And that's frustrating. I mean, that's frustrating for your agency people too, because how do you ask, you get no more money, but your contract keeps going up, right? So that's really not fun for you guys. It's not fun for the agencies. And so one huge benefit of having this locked in contract, they have to provide it to us for this price for 12 years. So ideal situation, maybe not. Does it have some silver linings? I'm going to say, yes, it does. Now, again, when we went in to ask them to cut the price, they could have said, hey, Wyoming, take a flying leap. And they really came to the table and worked with us in what I believe is good faith. If they hadn't, maybe I would feel differently.
Okay. Thank you very much. Follow up, Senator Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I guess, and back to the one pager, I'd like to see all the modules, because there was a lot of talk about all these modules and nobody could answer the question of what these are and I would like to know which ones we're using and which ones we're not, and maybe have some kind of objective plan and how going forward that we don't get into a longer contract with things that we're not using. So that's kind of my concern.
Thank you. Further questions on this topic? We'll go to Senator and then come here and then go there. Senator Guru.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. The Y Open, that was your project, correct?
Madam Auditor.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Gru, yes.
Thank you for the follow-up. You weren't under any federal mandate, any state mandate, any state law, anything else other than just your desire to do that. Is that true?
Madam Auditor.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Gru, yes, that's correct.
Okay, so.
Senator.
Thank you. I guess my point is, as far as doing it, and it's been tremendously successful. Would you not agree with that statement?
Auditor. Yes.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, yes, I would agree.
Okay.
Oh, but may I provide a statistic?
Please do.
So, Mr. Chairman, we and I know that a lot of you have supported transparency on this committee and helped us get there. So I appreciate that. Wyoming was great from the start, and it's been out for just under 2 years. But just for some statistical, my question is, well, is anybody actually going to look at it other than, my mom or whatever? And so last February, we had about 800 page hits to Y Open, which is great, right? That's fantastic. People are using this information. So, and I apologize, I mean February of the prior year of 2020. So in July, we started posting, we did a specific report for CARES Act data and put out every dollar that we've posted of CARES Act data. And so in November of last year, we had 19,000 hits to the site. So my point is, Mr. Chairman, it hasn't gone stale. As we roll out these new monies, sometimes there's a lot of interest in those.
Thank you. Senator Grew.
No, that's it. I'm done. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much.
That's-
Representative Brown.
Thank you. Madam Auditor, kind of following up on Senator Bouchard's questions here just a few seconds ago. The long-term contract is scary and kind of gets people on edge. But in your opinion, do you believe that also provided us a little bit of latitude when Deputy Director was going forward with contract negotiations and the discussion with the vendor that they're willing to provide us with this upgrade to get us to this new system without a cost associated with? So while we see the immediate implications and being a little worried about those, is there also not a benefit to having some of those that provide us some leverage in situations such as what we just had?
Madam Auditor.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, I mean, yes, I think I would agree. I think there's some obvious costs to getting us locked into that contract, but I think it's a good vendor that they're not perfect, but we trust them. They've generally acted in good faith to Wyoming and everything that we know about. So we think it's fine. We have less heartburn about it than we did when we came in. I would say that.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Auditor, since you mentioned the CARES Act funds, and one of the things that our committee was asked to do in 2020 when the Management Council talked about COVID topics was to look at CARES Act funds, particularly there were certain portions of it that this committee was allocated. I'm not sure we've done enough of that. And you just mentioned the CARES Act funds, some of the distributions there. I was talking about it earlier. Do you have any ideas on how this committee can, and obviously, it's more of a financial audit or a financial auditing function, but can be doing some oversight over CARES Act distributions and future federal funny money? It's all federal debt they're using to pay for these things. It's outrageous, really. But any audits on the distributions of those funds and future allocations? Thanks.
Thank you, Auditor Racines.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, I think that's a wonderful question. It's what we're all asking ourselves. What did we learn from CARES that we can use in ARPA, right? So what did we do well? What did we maybe not do well? As far as what the proper role of legislative oversight or audit is, I'm not sure I could opine on that. What I would say is any level of detail of the data we can provide very easily. If you want high level, if you want an overview of programs, and to say here's the 12 buckets in which CARES funds were spent. What would you like to know more about? That's something where we could be helpful. And sorry, Representative Gray, I'm not trying to avoid the question. I just, we've got all the data that you could ever want to see.
Well, maybe, Mr. Speaker, sorry, in this format, I would like to get recognized. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Maybe that is one way to do it. Do you have a concept of 12 buckets that maybe you've allocated in Wyopen that one way that we could look at that and then maybe dig in to the vendors that way? Do you have any ideas on that? Has there been any segregation of thinking of the distributions and trying to place them in a category?
Auditor Racines.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray. So actually, I'm happy to provide any sort of alignment. But if you go out to Wyopen, there's every single line item of CARES Act expenses posted, but we also have a pie chart where we've put every single expenditure into buckets. For example, education is a bucket. The legislative expenses are a bucket. ag relief is a bucket. And so if you go out there and look and maybe start with that, it's real pretty. We're real proud of it. We worked hard on it. So there's a pie chart out there that shows you those buckets. And then if this committee wanted more detail, less detail, that's something we'd be happy to provide.
Yes, can I?
Please follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Auditor Racinas, so if things come across your desk that, you know, I've heard in the past, you know, auditors say, well, everything comes across, we get an invoice. I mean, but I know there's some discretion there. Anything that you've seen that has really made you think twice and maybe is offensive? I mean, I hear anecdotal things and just wonder if there's a lot of funding being distributed here and have you had any questions? Something come across your desk a couple times that it's just, this is odd.
Auditor Racinas, anything odd on your desk?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, I have a lot of odd things on my desk. In regards to CARES Act, however, you know, one thing, Representative Gray, that maybe gave me the most heartburn was the timeline. The timeline of the expenditures gave me serious heartburn because I didn't think I think there was gonna be a lot of expenses that were tough to pay. Fortunately, the timeline was extended through the end of this year. Apart from that, I don't think I have any specific block of expenditures that I would call into question. The one thing I would say is I tend to be pretty much a stickler with the federal regulations. And I think we've all found that it's easy to take any expenditure and tie it to COVID, you know, if we have the will to do it. And so I tend to, you know, like to be more careful about those things. But no, I can't really say I have any expenditures that I've seen in the expenses that just feel completely wrong.
Okay, thank you very much. Further questions? Representative Stiver and then back to Senator Bouchard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The question I've got is, I don't know how to put this. I've heard through the grapevine that there's certain Wyoming Business Council put money out that has to be paid back. How much in, how's that going?
Madam Moderator, if you can respond to it, that's fine. If not, we'll get some follow-up information because there are audits that the department, that agency is doing, and there are monies flowing back in. Some of them are being flowed back in voluntarily. Some are being flowed back in because of unable to comply or non-compliant. So, Madam Auditor, if you want to speak to that, you can. Otherwise, we'll reach out to the Business Council and get some of that information, which the Director, Josh Durrell, is aware of that, has had those inquiries elsewhere. So that information is actually fairly readable. But Madam Auditor, if you want to speak to that, if you're involved in that process, that'd be great.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stiver, good question. I don't remember the numbers. I'm hesitant to throw out anything for fear of being inaccurate. The one thing I would say is when you receive those numbers from the Business Council, or if you go to our super awesome, colorful pie chart on WYOPEN, you'll see we put out about 420 million to businesses. So just keep that in mind when you say, okay, what's been paid back as a percentage of that went out. So yes, everything you said about the process was accurate. I just apologize. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head.
Madam Auditor, does the pie chart, is there a way for that to reflect monies that do flow back? I mean, these monies went out. Is there a way to reflect them that they have flown back in, either through voluntary or through requests from any agency? Thank you, Madam.
So, Mr. Chairman, currently the pie chart and the buckets we have presented on WYOPEN are monies that went out and stayed out. So, Mr. Chairman, if someone was to get a grant for $300,000 and paid back $200,000 of that voluntarily, our data would reflect that they've received $100,000.
Thank you. Any further follow-up? Senator Bouchard. Sorry, my apologies.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't mean to put you in the hot seat here, but there was a question asked before that there was no pressure put on to move us towards transparency. And I can tell you, I'm proud of the work that I've done in the Senate, and I'm proud of the Senate that they stuck with me. But we ran a bill back in 2019. It was Senate File 119. And that was an act relating to administration of government requiring the posting of specific payments on the state auditor's website and the Wyoming Public Finance Expenditure Funds website. So it had a whole, and it was 5 years, and you had 30 days to put it up. And I'm really proud that we pushed that hard. And I remember it being a little bit of a fight. It wasn't just something that just was shooed in. So in the interest of full transparency, I mean, I do want the public to know that the Senate did have an active role in having your office do what they need to do. We didn't pass the legislation because the House killed it, left it sitting in a drawer. But I'm proud that the Senate put it out. Only one senator did not vote for that bill. So anything you can add to that?
Madam Auditor, please.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Bouchard, I would thank you for your work on transparency. I think everything you said was accurate. I think it has created an environment where our continued work on transparency is welcome. It was very clear marching orders for us to make sure we got expenditures turned over to dismiss the lawsuit, which was our first order of business. But I certainly do want to give our IT staff credit who came up on their own and said, and us as well said, hey, let's how do we avoid how do we not get sued in the future? How do we put this out proactively to make it easy and to make a statement? So I appreciate I appreciate your support of that as well.
Okay, further questions for the auditor? Further questions for the deputy auditor? All right, thank you very much. Is there anything else you want to provide comment on? Then we'll go on the Wolves system or anything else? Nope. All right, thank you, Deputy Auditor. So public comment. We do have someone in the public now. I don't know if they want to provide comment on this one. Okay, all right. Anybody online? Anybody online? Okay, so we're pretty close to our schedule, and thank you, Madam Auditor. I think is Rosemary online? So if you will bring Rosemary in, we'll take this. And actually, Madam Auditor, you don't have to run off if you don't want to, because this is about special district accounting systems. So you may want to provide some feedback if Ms. Lanta says something you're interested in. So Ms. Lanta, have you joined us? Welcome, Ms. Wilkinson.
Mr. Chairman, she's in the room. She just needs to, oh, she's coming on now.
Mr. Chairman?
I hear your voice, Ms. Lanta. Maybe turn on your camera as well, maybe? Please.
Okay. I apologize. It's showing that I am on. I have been having difficulty with my connection all morning. And it is currently showing that I'm on. So let me see.
Now you are on.
There you go.
Please proceed. Great.
Thank
Nice
you.
to have you here. Please introduce yourself and provide your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Rosemary Lanta for the Wyoming Association of Special Districts on the agenda in a few minutes about accounting system. And if I may have leave, Mr. Chairman, I because of the difficulties I've been having this morning, I had raised my hand earlier. So if I may be permitted to just provide some information on the prior topics, particularly the reporting issue.
You are more than welcome to start with that, and then you can work right into your assigned topic, please, or your topic time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our board met on Friday, and one of the things we looked at was the list of the non-compliant districts who had not done the reporting as required by statute, and what we may be able to do as an association to assist in increasing compliance. So I think two vehicles that we're going to be using is first, well, three. Two of them are communication vehicles. We have the ability now that we've got a good list of all the districts in the state to send out blast emails. So in conjunction with our quarterly newsletter, which starts in July, anytime there's an upcoming due date, most specifically the ones that are listed on the public funds website, we're going to be sending a reminder to all of the almost 700 districts that it's due, as well as provide the form. I think this will help a lot in reaching out, a reminder of it. So for instance, our quarterly newsletter, which will drop on the 28th, above the fold before we do anything else, we're putting the reminders of the budget hearing due date, as well as the due date to provide our budgets to both the counties and the state. There's also going to be a block in that newsletter that has the future due dates of the reports that are due. The other thing that we discussed that we're going to try to form is a peer reach out group from districts, basically having one expert from each kind of district available to either answer questions for districts or to be the one to reach out when we get the list early on in the year before December 30th, that there are people who have not turned in their reports, just to reach out and remind them to get them in. We're hoping that this will help increase the compliance on that. And then moving on to our special district survey of accounting programs, sent out a survey this month asking them to pick one of three choices, which was QuickBooks or some other similar type of package, a bookkeeping service by contract, or an Excel type ledger. So 76% of our respondents use a QuickBooks or very similar type accounting program. 11% contract with a bookkeeping service, and 13% use an Excel spreadsheet. In reading through the comments on the poll that we sent out, we did get a lot of comments back. What they're using is very directly related to the size of their districts. So the districts that write very few checks in a year, very small districts, are the ones who have the Excel spreadsheets. The largest districts are the ones who contract with the bookkeeping service. And then everybody else in the middle, in terms of the people that responded, are using a QuickBooks type program. I can tell you that's what we use we have a contract bookkeeper, and then we also use QuickBooks in one of the entities that we fund to do the bookkeeping. And it's very effective for matching up with the kind of chart of accounts that we have. So out of our out of all the districts that we sent this out to, and we sent it out to all 700, we got 233 responses. Again, we were doing this in May when everybody had their face down in their budget. So I feel confident in reading through the comments related to the size and the fact that they don't have staff, that it's going to hold pretty close to what's being used in the state.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Lanta. And thank you for finishing out with a number that you were in communication with. That's helpful as well. Any questions on that first topic, which was in response to some earlier testimony? Any response? Any questions? I don't see any. All right. So Ms. Lanta, if you'd like to proceed to, or if you'd like to add any more, because you've kind of already touched the accounting systems part, which is the 11:15 part of the discussion. Anything you'd like to add more about the survey or going forward, or any of the discussion we had this morning, particularly with the state auditor and the potential to have a uniform or a chart of accounts and some customization and the access to the state system. Anything on those? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as you know, I had pointed out, I believe in the last meeting, and the Public Funds has done, they did line up the special districts chart of account to the electronic budget system this year. So that was the start of trying to make everyone aware, even if they're not a bookkeeper, if there's somebody that's using QuickBooks, a correlation between how the electronic budget, which in itself is really a chart of accounts, but now has been improved with actually adding the account number. I think it'll make it easier for anyone who's trying to review it to correlate it to how we're keeping the books. I would have to say that the majority of the comments, what spurred most of the comments back from the people who participated in the report, was concern of the disruption it would cause to try to have any kind of standardization of some kind of a platform, between concerns about the disparate volumes. You know, I know that, for instance, special districts command budgets of, I think it was a little over $1 billion. But if you drill down in it, which I'm hoping to do, I've requested the reports from Public Funds. There's an awful lot of federal money in that $1 billion, over $1 billion. You know, if you divide that by 700, it's 1,700,000 per district. Well, we all know that not every district does that. In fact, a good proportion of the districts are under the $800,000 a year threshold in terms of their revenue. So to try to inform that question, I have requested a report from Public Funds, and I'm hoping that it can be done from the information they aggregate to the cost of government, something that splits it out by revenue, grants, the tax levy, and fee for service. I think that'll help all of us understand a little bit more about the extreme complexity of some special districts and the relative nature of how small districts having to migrate to a kind of a category killer platform might not make sense. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Members, any questions for Ms. Lanta? She's actually done several things that have been helpful. The alignment that was done, I think that was a good suggestion that came out of the last meeting. And then this communication piece, I hope that's being coordinated with our Department of Audit and other folks. And then the survey is also interesting. So I have Representative Brown with the first question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am just kind of curious on the last comment made from Rosemary on this, and whether or not the Department of Audit is able to break that out, and if they're going to be able to get that to the special districts. I'm just kind of curious on that.
Okay, I don't know that they heard I don't know if our representative of the audit division heard the question. So they were conferring, but if they did hear the question, I'd like to come forward, I'd like it re-asked. That'd be fine. Sorry, and we're equal opportunity here. You stayed in the room, you get asked a question. Mr. Cummings? So I think the question was regarding some of the information Ms. Lanta was interested in. Is that something that's going to be, you're going to be able to provide? I think it had to do with the sources of revenue, particularly. Mr. Cummings.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. It depends. So the way our form breaks out when we request a breakdown of their revenue, because that's the request that she's referring to. We do have, depending on how they break it down, we can show some of the revenue came from federal sources. Is that what she's looking for? I guess I'm not sure.
Ms. Lanta, if you just maybe restate the type of information you think would be helpful in your assessment of what special districts are doing. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I had, first of all, let me tell you, the Department of Public Funds, Audit Public Funds has been an incredible resource to me ever since 2014, when I was asked to help that community in their efforts to create a special district. And through the years, I've been able to request reports, and basically what I had requested is a report that had all the districts on it. And instead of the lump sum $1.7 billion, I think it is, that's on the cost of government report, being able to identify it by the same budget lines that we have to use on the electronic budget form, which would be the mill levy, grants, and operating revenue. I think that would be able to inform so many decisions and also maybe dispel a lot of myths, since there are so many districts. I believe it's close to 700, ranging from districts that have a budget of less than $10,000 a year up to those that have substantial budgets. But it also will help identify that there are certain districts that receive a great amount of federal money, which is earmarked, and that tends to overshadow the comments or the opinions of just how much money is in the hands of these 700 districts. So that's, I had made that request last week through Stacy. And she told me that it was going to have to wait until somebody was back in the office till Tuesday. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. So maybe, Mr. Cummings, you haven't heard about the request yet. It hasn't got to your desk or your supervisor's desk. So, but anyway, you see a possibility in working with this type of request? Because I think there'd certainly be an interest to not just Ms. Lanta, but even to this committee. So any thoughts on that?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. We will work with them very closely and try and find out exactly what kind of information we can provide. We do get quite a bit of detail on these reports, but sometimes it might not be in the format that she might be looking for, but we definitely will work with her. I did see the request early this morning in the email. And so I was planning on getting back with her today sometime after this. So.
All right. Well, here's your first chapter. You'll get a second chapter later.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions for Ms. Lanta or any suggestions? Anybody online for public comment? Anybody else? Ms. Lanta, do you have any following last comments?
No, sir, but I thank you for the opportunity, and any time we can help inform the committee, we will make sure that someone's available.
I appreciate that. Representing 700 various districts as an association will likely be interesting at times. So I appreciate the effort that's being made to try to bring that in. Anyone else in the room? Auditor, anybody else want to make comment? Anyone else want to make comment? All right. So members, I think we're through our morning agenda. I know there's been some suggestions for potential bill drafts and some ideas. I think maybe if folks want to take a little bit of time over lunch, kind of formalize those and maybe give us, and then we can take them up immediately after lunch upon the end of the working day. We have a couple members that have other obligations this afternoon. And so, but we will still have a quorum and we can still conduct business. So, so at this time, I think we will stand in recess until 1 o'clock for your lunch hour, unless there's some other business that needs to come before we do that recess. Any other business?